Welcome, everyone. It is Wednesday, September 3rd. It's my pleasure to call to order the meeting of the Freeport Planning Board, a couple minutes after 6. We'll dive right in. As always, item number 1 is an information exchange, and first we'll hear from Kyle about items reviewed by the Freeport Project Review Board.
Yeah. So in August, the PRB had 2 conceptual applications. The first was a site plan concept application from Maine Beer Company. They're looking to, well, so actually, yeah, the board would have been involved in this. You know, last fall, I think we did the zone change for a piece of the parcel abutting Maine Beer, and that was to allow this project to happen. So they came forward with their parking expansion proposal. They'll be coming back at the September meeting for their full application submission and hopefully the vote then. But everything was looking pretty good with that project, going as expected. And then the other project that came forward was an application for a 51-unit multifamily apartment building on the corner of Mill and Depot in the parking lot there right across from the garage. So a few years ago, I guess there was a 60-something unit apartment building proposed that was approved but never built. So now we have a similar design, slightly different shaped building, but the same overall idea.
So it's the uphill side, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
And yeah, so they will probably come back. I believe they're looking to come back for their final submission at the October meeting. So they're taking a month off to kind of finalize some of their engineering and stuff, but you know, we should see that relatively soon. So good news there.
That's great.
Yeah. Zoning text amendments and just kind of zoning updates from the town council. The comp plan public hearing was last night, or they set the public hearing last night for 9/16. So that process is just about done. Council didn't have too many questions or concerns raised, so we're expecting hopefully that gets wrapped up in a couple weeks at the next council meeting, which will be great. Because one of our agenda items tonight is kind of relying on some of those changes going into effect. So other council updates, the parking moratorium language did go to council at last night's meeting for the public hearing. The council took comments from the public and voiced some of their own opinions. There was no vote last night. The vote whether to adopt the moratorium will happen also at that 9/16 meeting. So anyone interested in that, I suggest you can go back and watch the video from last night and then stay tuned to the meeting on the 16th. I think feedback from the public was in support of the moratorium, and that seemed to be the general feedback from council as well, but we'll see for sure on 9/16.
Just as far as process on that, there's not another hearing that night, right? Is it just, there's like a 2-week pause due to state language? Or state requirements about how a moratorium is enacted. So you have to go through that 2-week pause period for some reason, and then the council meets again and votes. And I guess they could discuss it more, but they're not.
Yeah, I'm not sure if
an additional hearing. So
they'll take more public comment at that meeting or not, but
it'll probably be up to them.
yeah, but they could, I guess.
I have one question. Did they comment on the planning board's tie vote?
Some councilors commented that they watched the planning board meeting.
Recording in progress.
And the town manager's memo to them, Sophie outlined the planning board meeting, and she addressed some of the points from both sides, of those in favor and those who voted not to recommend the moratorium language. So they did cover it. That was a piece of their kind of overall discussion, along with the public feedback. The council also had that workshop before the planning board saw the language from the public. So I do think they heard from a lot of people that weren't necessarily as vocal at the planning board meeting. But they did give guidance along with some of the planning board's comments from our meeting that they, I think, would like this resolved also in a timely fashion. So if the moratorium is adopted, I expect there to be some conversation in early October where the council gives guidance, kind of specific guidance on the direction they want to see, and that would come back to the planning board at that time, as far as any sort of policy direction that they want to see. So we'll have more updates then.
I spoke as myself at the meeting last night too, in support of, my personal opinion in support of the moratorium, but also I made clear that that the planning board, which I think it was fair for me to speak in this one narrow way for the whole board in saying that the board was interested in moving quickly to resolve this. Everybody recognized that this is an issue that needs to be resolved. I think the discrepancy was what the best way to deal with it. Is it moratorium, maybe not moratorium? So I try not to speak for the board on that part of it, but I did want to make sure that the council understood that we are ready to move quickly to get to a good conclusion. Also, fun fact, I tripped while I was speaking over my son's violin in the dark and almost fell flat on my face. It was very,
Oops.
so, couldn't hear it? Okay, yeah, it was really, yeah, it was exciting. I was pacing around the house and,
And the last update from the council meeting last night, so, we recently went through the amendment process to have the height increase on Depot Street. One thing that kind of came up tied to that is that, obviously Depot Street, it's in the VC1, it's in the design review district, right? So the VC, zoning ordinance looks at building height very objectively, right? But design review, part of the reason why we're doing the whole design review update is that the design review is a more subjective document. So as the board and council's intention was to kind of specifically allow for taller buildings on Depot Street, we feel like I think this might have come up originally when we were talking about the height. Since design review update isn't going to be ready in the next month or so, we think it's valid that we have a kind of targeted amendment to the existing design review ordinance that exempts buildings or projects on Depot Street from being considered for height and height in relation to scale under the current design review ordinance. So if a project comes in the next month or two and they want to take advantage of that taller height on Depot Street, they wouldn't be able to be denied based on some visual compatibility finding, as it's the intent, based on raising the height to 55 feet. In the new design review ordinance update, we're not going to be looking at those sorts of visual compatibility things anymore. So council agreed. They kind of gave direction to take that amendment to the planning board. So we'll do that in October. I'll bring some language forward that just calls out an exemption, probably in the design guidelines section of our existing design review ordinance. And we can go from there. We can take a look at it.
A little bit of a Band-Aid, but hopefully one that doesn't take too much of our time.
Yeah.
And does that apply to the proposed project that you referenced earlier?
So the project that went to the PRB in August is not proposing to be, to need that height addition. So it wouldn't apply for them because they fall within the existing 45 feet.
And yeah, I guess there's always some risk that somebody makes the claim that they're not visually compatible, but
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
right, design review still applies to that project, so, but there's not really a building right near that property that would probably bring that up. It didn't come up as an issue at the conceptual meeting. But there are locations elsewhere on Depot Street where it could be more of an issue. So that's sort of what it's getting at.
Targeted fix that won't hopefully do any harm, and certainly seems like it's in keeping with the spirit of everything we've been talking about, working toward over the last couple of years. So
So that's it, though.
great. Item number 2 is a review of the minutes from the August 6th planning board meeting. I believe, so Wayne was not here, but I think the other 4 of us were, so we can still vote on that, right? Yeah, so that's a quorum for that. So, does anybody have any comments from the draft minutes? This was a particularly long one.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a long meeting, but
On coastal waters.
oh, no, I should not be.
I do have a couple.
14 pages, and thank you, Sharon, as always. Yes, Bonnie?
On page 6, Sharon, it says, the last paragraph of the last sentence of the 3rd paragraph down, where it says, say I want to reverse my plates. Is that supposed to be plans?
Wondered about that. I was thinking like maybe plates, like certificate of,
Yeah,
but
I was reading it and I'm like,
maybe it could say change my plans, or change, yeah,
Well, don't they call what you sign plates?
maybe.
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Oh,
then-
somebody's
okay,
mic,
then never
somebody's
mind.
mic not on? Oh, Bonnie.
No, it wasn't, sorry.
And I think they call those plates. when they-
Okay.
Whatever they bring in, and all the planning board members,
And
PIB signs them, I think they call them
Sharon
plates.
says yes, so Sharon, I'll go with you. And on page 7, town loft and staff loft in the last paragraph.
I'm sorry, what is it?
In the last paragraph, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th sentence down, town loft and staff loft.
Which paragraph are you in?
The last paragraph, 5th sentence,
5th line.
5th line, thank you,
Yeah,
sorry.
that's right.
I assume it's just supposed to be lot.
Yeah,
That's what I assumed too, but I just,
Gotcha.
like, maybe there's something I don't know. Things were called lofts.
I was just imagining like a mezzanine level. It was the staff mezzanine, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No worries.
I had a couple comments on this one, that, now I have to scroll through and find them. So, sorry, just had the first one. I thought on page 5, I just wanted to add a clarifying bit. If anyone is looking for that section, so this is the 4th paragraph down. It says Chair Capella asked the board if the board has any other questions. If anyone is looking for that section, which is section 514, off-street parking and loading. Why did I flag this? There was a reason. Oh, if anyone's looking for that section on, I just thought it needed additional context, looking for the section that talks about parking, just because it wasn't referenced earlier than that. So I just,
So it was 514 off-street parking?
yes, which it says in here, but it says, if anyone is looking for that section, and then maybe add a little, something that says, if anyone is looking for the section that discusses parking and loading, or something like that. I think that would clarify. Or add off-street parking and loading to the description. Scrolling down to the next page, in the 3rd paragraph, it says, Chair Capella added, it is not to say that they can barricade it off. I think what I meant is they cannot, it's not to say that they can't barricade it off. So that's a sort of a double negative, but the intent is to say that a landowner isn't required to offer free parking, right? Like, that's not the only possible use. They could barricade it and offer no parking, or they could build a park, or they could do many other things with their land. So just to clarify that,
So you want to change can to can't?
can to can't is the primary change. Yep. You could say, not to say that they can't barricade it off and use it for something else. And then, I think that was it.
I have a probable correction on page 8. I wasn't here, but on page 8, That wasn't mine.
Oh, okay.
I'll let you go after. The paragraph starting with what Mr. Ruda advised, that there is a reason, toward the bottom of page 8. The last sentence, he's talking about whether circumstances constitute an emergency or not. And the last sentence says, if it is not isolated and is well marked.
So moved from Dave,
Second it?
and a second from Andrew. All in favor, who are present? That is unanimous.
I should abstain because I wasn't there, right?
Yes, and Wayne is excused from that vote. All right, item number 3 is, or will be, a public hearing on proposed zoning text amendment for the main golf center. This is an applicant-driven zoning text amendment by Maine Golf Center to amend Chapter 21, which is the zoning ordinance, Section 514, off-street parking and loading, that's our favorite section right now, regarding amendments to the minimum off-street parking requirements for golf courses and golf driving ranges. Kyle, do you want to
Yeah, I'll give
lead us
a
off here?
review. So, this kind of started, Maine Golf was recently approved at the PRB for a new driving range structure, so if anyone's gone by, looks great, by the way. And in that conversation, and it's noted in here as well, that there's a plan for a phase 2 project for them. So that would involve some upgraded parking facilities and clubhouse area. So that application will eventually go to the PRB as well for site plan. But in that kind of research process leading up to that application, the applicant noticed, I imagine this is a fairly untouched area of our ordinance, the golf course parking requirements, that our off-street parking requirements for golf courses and golf driving ranges are fairly substantial and probably more than
Absurd might be,
what's needed.
One word. Yeah.
So, requiring 8 parking spaces for every hole, 1.5 parking spaces for each driving tee, and then on top of that, you have the 1 space for each 35 square feet of kind of assembly building area for the clubhouse, and then additional parking for 200 square feet of floor area if there's a attached commercial use. So the applicant approached the planning department for, options for a zoning amendment. We worked with them to come up with some language that we felt was acceptable. I think they did a good job of providing some sample off-street parking standards from other communities to show that, what's being proposed isn't, out of line with, what we
Recording
see
in progress.
in the surrounding area. But basically, they did the math showing, under our existing ordinance, it needs something to the effect of 178 parking spaces. So the existing golf course is located in our rural zone, as we talked about kind of frequently through our comp plan update process. The idea of growing in our growth areas and protecting natural areas in our rural zone The rural areas do allow for, some of these commercial outdoor recreation opportunities. Having these incredibly high parking requirements, requiring, thousands and thousands of square feet of impervious area to go in to meet a parking requirement that will probably not be needed, probably doesn't align too well with our existing comp plan or the new comp plan that's about to be adopted. So the new language that's proposed has a base parking space requirement for each hole and driving range tee still. Those numbers were lowered to 2 spaces per hole and 1 space for each driving range tee. And then to handle the kind of extra spaces on any golf course, because we only have the one right now in town, but there could be others that come forward, right? And they could have a different scale that they're looking to operate than what the applicant has. So we felt that the language here offers the PRB in those situations flexibility. If a golf course is coming forward, like the applicant, where they're looking to use the clubhouse mainly to process people using the course, have a small seating area or some informational areas. I think they reference a museum. A small snack area. They can propose a parking analysis that recognizes, the demand that they're expecting. And if they are anticipating any kind of special events, weddings or banquets, things like that. So that a smaller golf course really oriented more towards, utilizing their golf course can be viewed in a different lens than a course that's expecting to be used for, lots of these kind of special event cases where they might need higher levels of parking. That language is very similar to how we review parking in our existing commercial districts, where applicants in their site plan applications provide a parking analysis as part of their site plan application. There's not a specific minimum off-street parking requirement in our commercial districts, so they provide this analysis saying, this is the traffic we expect to receive, this is the employees that we have, and the board makes a finding whether they think there's, that passes the straight face test. So similar language would be used here to handle these kind of accessory buildings associated with the golf course. Other than that, those are really the only 2 lines of the ordinance affected in the table and the off-street parking section, so it's a fairly minimal and surgical zoning amendment, but happy to answer any questions, and the applicant's here as well to provide any additional, project overview and answer questions as well.
I have a question, Kyle. What would constitute a parking analysis? Do we have to define that in any way as what that is, or is it just whatever the applicant, puts forth in as far as their description of what their activities are going to be, and is that the analysis, or is there measurements taken, or anything like that, I guess?
So it could mean a few different things, and I think it would be up to staff and ultimately the project review board to determine it. So, like right now, we don't have an ordinance requirement through site plan. We don't define what a traffic analysis is. We tell people, you're required to provide estimated trip generation. Typically, if something's going to trigger a traffic movement permit through the DOT or something where you're generating over 100 trips, in a peak hour or something, then the board has the ability to ask for a more robust analysis where you're looking at the level of service of streets being impacted and things like that. So it's not defined, but we would typically go through that process through a conceptual plan meeting. So if some high traffic, use came in an area that was susceptible to, traffic issues, staff might call that out in a report to the board at a conceptual level, and the board could deliberate, what they want to see for a traffic analysis specifically.
Any other questions? We'll hear from the applicant.
Straightforward.
David?
Thank you. My name is David Matero. My company, David Matero Architecture, is located in Bath. I don't have to say much. Kyle was really good with the synopsis, but just to sort of emphasize what the ordinance says is that currently the golf course has about 30 parking spaces. It has 20 tee boxes. It has a 9-hole, has a 1,400 square foot clubhouse. Using this ordinance, they would have to provide 142 parking spaces, and 30 has been sufficient for the last whatever years. So as we move forward, our clubhouse, and to answer Mrs. Spear's question, I think a good analysis for us will come back to the project review board with a room that might be 1,000 square feet. By code, that's a place of assembly, and it can fit something like 80 people in it. And so if you go by square footage, we'd have to provide parking for those 80 people. Divided by 35, it's a lot. That room is going to have 2 simulators, golf simulators. That's designed for 2 to 4 people for a simulator. So in reality, 10 people will be in this room, but by code, which is for fire safety, life safety, we have to assume 80 people will be in it. But for parking, we'll come back and want to use a more realistic sort of analysis of what that room is actually going to do. So that's part of what the traffic analysis will do in the future, if we can rewrite the ordinance where we can sort of maybe be more practical for the use of the whole clubhouse and golf course. So I think in general, we want to make sure there's good parking, but the way it's written right now, it's overburdensome for any sort of golf course, especially this one. I'm going to answer any more questions you might have, but I think I think it seems obvious that it seems overly abundant.
To the point that my main question, which isn't for you, but is just why?
I was
What
thinking the
is the
same.
history of this?
What?
Who said,
Right.
especially, it almost seems more ridiculous to me that a tee on a driving range should have 1.5 cars. It's like, is every other person bringing like a drinking buddy who's just gonna watch? And,
everybody's-
it's just nuts.
Well, they'd be drinking and driving then.
Yeah, right. What is, so I'm fully in favor.
Maybe they just didn't want another golf course in town.
Right, that was
Possibly.
that was my obvious.
This was probably written back in the 80s and 90s, and
Yeah.
I think with any of these things,
Yeah.
figuring out what the business needs is
Yeah.
really where we should be starting from,
Yeah.
not
If you don't want another golf course in town, you could just not allow the use and just say, these guys are grandfathered.
I doubt there'll ever be another golf course in town.
Yeah. Oh, right. Totally. Yeah, it seems very unlikely. Very unlikely. So I don't have any, if anything, I would almost lower it further and just leave it up to the business to figure it out. But I'm totally fine with this as written. Anybody have any other thoughts?
I think, he knows better than we do how many spaces he needs.
Totally. Yeah, I agree.
with that.
I agree 100%.
When the road got shut off in 86, I guess it was, used to be Old County Road went right across, and then they had the whole end of the dead-end road to use as parking, I don't know how many times they've ever been overloaded, but it's pretty hard to, get in trouble down at the end of a dead-end road.
Yep, right by the highway.
So where are you gonna put the driving range?
It's there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, so you can see it from the highway.
So it's right along the highway?
Yeah, so the structure, there's 20 tee boxes, and we're able to build 10 covered, which you can see it from the highway, so really excited about
That used to be the first fairway.
Yes. First fairway right now goes parallel to the highway before it zips around. So we took out a couple of the middle, the current driving range goes, if you've been there, goes down a hill, there's gullies and there's woods, and it's terrible for picking up golf balls. So those will be we're switching a couple of holes to use that for a golf course, to be prettier. And then the flat middle area will now be the driving range, and it should be open and, pretty soon. Phase 2, which we come back for, we have to go through a DEP process before we can come back to you, or I guess Project Review Board. We're hoping that the clubhouse will be starting construction next year, which would include the parking lot, a new parking lot, and a new clubhouse.
Roughly same area? right at the
Yeah.
end of the road?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That got moved once.
It wouldn't be hard to move. In
No,
fact,
but it
it's
got
gonna be
moved once.
It already has moved once?
Yeah, because in the eighties, they put the second lane of 95 through, so
Oh.
they, you know, that second lane
Yeah.
ate into the golf course too.
Right, right. Yeah, interesting.
Yep, yeah. No need to pave things that don't need to be paved in a
No.
rural zone, so. And cost people money that doesn't need to be spent, so.
Yeah, so it should be, there is a, just to kind of go along with that, there is a provision in our off-street parking ordinance now where the PRB can approve like a 50% reduction in the required amount of parking. And then, you know, if it turns out there's issues with parking, the town can go back and require that the rest be built. You know, you basically have to show that you have the space to do it, but you don't actually have to do the paving. But even with the 50% reduction, it was still
Still too many.
incredible amount to build, so.
Well, that's good. I mean, that makes me feel good about where it is now, and then if for some reason, you know, these applicants
So if we
wanna-
cut this by 50%, does he have to build that 50%, or can he go to PRB and say, I don't need to build 50%, I need to build 25% of this number we have on the table today? You know, the original number. If we cut it in half, is that still twice as much as he needs, is I guess my question.
I think we're proposing cutting it to what they're suggesting, a reasonable amount. So
Okay.
then if they do, I don't know, some analysis or something changes, they could say, what is the number under that? So under this one, you would need, under your proposed change with your current plan, you would be required to build 48 parking spaces. So then if you said, well, actually, the requirement is 48, but we only think we need 24. So theoretically, the PRB has the leeway in the future to
Okay.
only approve 24 parking spaces, but then that does give the town a little bit of recourse if the neighbor said, hey, there's always people parking on my lawn or whatever, then.
So we're going from 178 to 48 or something.
Yeah.
That's good, because you got 30 now, right?
Yeah. So,
That's not a big jump, another 18, 20.
No, it's not, and I think, you know, we're hoping, we're hoping that the driving range takes off and more people use it. And the golf course is really, wants to be oriented more towards junior golf and teaching, so more of a teaching center. So, you know, we are trying to grow the sport, and hopefully the golf course grows with it. So I think there's an appropriate number of growth in that number of parking requirements. And, you know, it's really spread out over time. The driving range can be used at 9 o'clock at night. Well, you can't golf at 9 o'clock at night. So there's also this kind of shared parking scenario going on, too, where their uses are somewhat different. You can use the driving range in a driving rainstorm because it's covered, and you can't really play golf in that. So, you know, I think it's the best of both worlds. 48 is still a lot. It's still, parking is expensive and expensive to build. So it's still, you know, a challenge to build that many, but we think that's much more an appropriate number.
You've got 30 now on,
It's on gravel.
can you build the new ones on gravel?
Well, that's a question we haven't approached the town yet. I don't know if there's a provision that you have to provide asphalt.
No, gravel's allowed. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be good.
So that might be a phase, you know, I think ideally it's asphalt, but, you know, there's been a fundraising element to this, and they've raised, I think, almost $3 million for this project over the course of the last couple of years. So, you know, but that money goes fast when you build construction, right? So I think ideally it's asphalt, but if it's better to have parking in gravel than not. So I don't know what that eventual plan will be. We have to go through the site plan review process, the design. We have to work with DEP to make sure they're not going to ask for anything, you know, extra. And we still have to, you know, we designed the clubhouse, but then it needs to be priced out. So it's still a ways out.
all right. Thank you, David, for being here.
Do you want to open the public hearing?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about a public hearing.
Just to speak on that, we did advertise the public hearing, felt that this was relatively small and that the board could potentially do this in one meeting. So we wanted to make sure that if everyone was ready, we advertised the public hearing. So that's all been done.
We felt like this was cut and dried enough issue that we shouldn't delay it any further.
Yeah, this is easy.
Do I hear a motion to open the public hearing?
I move we open the public hearing.
Second, Bonnie, all in favor? Public hearing is now open. Is anyone on Zoom?
There's no one online.
No one on Zoom.
Hot topic.
I think we can safely close the public hearing. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to close?
Second.
Everyone, all in favor? Great. On to a proposed motion, should someone be brave enough to take it on. Kyle has done some of the work, and then I think we just need to make sure that it is consistent with the current.
No, so you're still doing this under the,
Old
Right,
comprehensive
that's,
plan.
yeah, that's what I mean, sorry,
Yeah.
the current, 2011,
Okay.
as opposed to 2025.
Yep.
Be it ordered that the Freeport Planning Board recommend to the town council that the proposed text amendment to chapter 21 zoning ordinance, section 514, off-street parking and loading to reduce the minimum parking requirement for golf courses and golf driving ranges is consistent with the town Freeport's comprehensive plan to provide an economy that would remain stable and strong by providing flexible regulation and allowing creative site and building designs so as to maintain negative environmental impacts.
And a second.
Second.
All in favor? Excellent. That's that. On to town council. 2 meetings there.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
The school kids play down there? The school still have a golf team?
Well, they have a
was
golf,
wondering that, too.
you know, I'm not sure. Right now, there's a lot of construction going on, so I don't know if they're playing there, but, Brian, I'm not sure. I can't answer that.
Just curious.
They do $5 kids. Play around for $5.
Hopefully it'll be a great place for,
'Cause in high school, I was on the golf team. We just played for free down there. You know, that's sort of our home course. And they did cross-country running down there, too.
the only time I've ever been there is to go skiing. It's a beautiful course to ski on. That's what I know about it. I have no idea which hole is which, but I know every inch of it. So, next item is item number 4. We will hear from Kyle, who will present an overview of existing space and bulk standards and performance standards that apply in the commercial districts. This is a preliminary discussion to provide some background context and highlight areas as we proceed down the road toward updating these zoning districts. And this is all part of our work plan that we talked about and
June.
approved a couple months ago, and the council seems to be on board with that as well. Parking discussions are gonna add an additional burden that wasn't part of that work plan, but hey.
There's
Okay.
a lot more than just parking. There's
yeah.
gonna be a bunch of stuff
Right.
that kind of gets
So-
thrown in there.
But I think this is a big one that we've been talking about for a while, the need to update performance standards, and I know this is near and dear to Andrew's heart, so excited to dive into this.
Yeah. This is fun because this is like kind of the first thing based on the new comp plan that, you know, I think we can really tackle. You know, I mean, just forget any upzoning. These districts, the way that they're laid out in the ordinance, just need a lot of simplifying and clarification. I mean, if you read through the space and bulk standards of really the C1 mostly, I mean, it's just a mess with the way it's laid out. I mean, codes, planning, when applicants try to look at it, it's not ideal to look at. So just from that lens, I think there's a lot to do here, but I wanted to do kind of an overview presentation, kind of highlighting what's existing, and then throughout, I've sprinkled in some policy questions where, you know, I might have some recommendations as places we go, but also getting feedback from the board on things that you want to see that are more policy questions, and so I can get some direction and then potentially put a draft amendment together to bring back for discussion of that. So jumping right in, you know, on the right, that's kind of the section call out from our zoning map. So C3 starts just south of L. Bean headquarters and goes south on the east side of Route 1 down to Pine Street. It ends a little shorter on the west side. And then the C1 picks up from right around Desert Road and Main Beer all the way south to the town line. Both districts right now, from a land use perspective, look pretty good from, a planning lens, right? They're both mixed-use districts. They allow pretty much anything I think we'd want to see there, from all types of residential uses, single-family, duplex, multifamily, affordable housing developments, with that 2.5 times density bonus, office, retail, restaurant. The C1 even starts treading into some of that light industrial territory, allowing some warehousing and, truck facilities and things like that. But so from a use perspective, they're pretty open, and I don't think a ton of work really needs to be done there. In the comp plan update, if you go into the growth area narrative sections for the Gateway, Village Gateway and Route 1 South growth areas, which covers this corridor, it talks about them being mixed-use corridors. So I think that fits in well. So the zoning sections we'd be looking at amending throughout this would primarily be the Commercial District 1, Commercial District 3, the specific zoning district sections for those two districts, and then Section 527, which provides performance standards for all commercial districts. So that is the C1, the C3, and also the C4. So you'll see the C4 up here. We're not going to touch that one for now because it's a little different than the C1 and C3, which are very similar.
That's basically the town garage, isn't it?
Yeah, there's not a ton out there.
One lot in the corner.
Yeah. It's also just, if you look at the C1 and C3, they're pretty similar. The C4 starts to be a little different. And, it's not in the growth area when you get out there. It's just not quite the same corridor and scenario. So this is a lot, but I want to spend some time on this. So this is our existing space and bulk standards in the C1 and C3. So the C1 is split. It has different space and bulk standards depending if you're in public water and sewer or not. It's not just public water and sewer. It's that top row is also if you have a single access point on your lot or shared access. So even if you were on water and sewer and you had multiple access points on your lot, you would follow that second row. And then the C3 at the bottom. So just calling out some things on here. I mean, you can see right away that the minimum lot sizes and the minimum land per dwellings are really high. I mean, the smallest lot you can create in any of these areas is nearly a half-acre lot on the west side of C1. So that W and E is west and east. So in the C1, you have different standards depending on what side of Route 1 you're on, which is, a choice that was made. So, but, the C3, you look at the land per dwelling, for instance, it's 7,000 square feet, right? That's only, if you're talking housing, 6 units an acre, and that's the densest area out of these two districts. So, you're talking multifamily housing potential. The idea of having 6 units on an acre is just not really feasible when it comes to generating any sort of, apartment building or townhouse style development. Especially, when you get on like the west side of Route 1 and there's more, acre lots, or, on the east side, there's some 1.5 acre lots. Having a 10,000 even minimum land per dwelling requirement, you can only do 4 units an acre. It's just not feasible for any sort of real project that would make a dent in housing need. Building height, 35 feet is what we see across the board for the two districts right now. If you're in the C1, 45 feet is possible if you're over 300 feet away from on the eastern side of Route 1. I guess the idea there was, if you're set far enough back and your building was screened, that, that extra 10 feet was possible. But we'll talk about each of these things. There's kind of a slide for each one to go into more detail. Setbacks, I would say, are probably, at least in the C1, the area that's the most kind of okay and in a decent spot. In the C1, you have a 15-foot front setback requirement, 5 or 15 on the side and the rear. I think the 5 comes into play if you're abutting by a commercial use or you share access with a abutting lot. The C3 does have larger setback requirements. That district is viewed as sort of a gateway into downtown, so I think the idea was that you'd have larger landscape setback areas. So instead of kind of bringing buildings closer to the street and providing that sort of walkable feel, I think they went with, at the time, more of like a visual kind of buffer and aesthetic as you're coming into the downtown. Road frontage requirements, the C1 doesn't have one if you're on public water and sewer. On the C3, it's 300 feet on Route 1 and Pine Street. And, the idea there, we'll cover this in some other sections in the 527 standards. There are some provisions in both of these districts that encourage limiting curb cuts on Route 1 and access points, and having access points at least 300 feet away from each other to, prevent like nonstop curb cuts as you go down Route 1 in a higher speed area, so people aren't, turning out onto Route 1 all the time. So one thing that we will have to consider, if we do look at smaller lots is, are we also going to reduce those sorts of standards, or are we okay with smaller lots, but, we should still encourage shared access drives so there aren't as many access points on Route 1.
Or is the speed limit not 50?
Sure.
I mean,
It's 45 now.
is it? Sorry.
Yeah, it's 45.
I've never gone 50 on that road. I don't know what.
People do all the time. They pass, they,
Yeah.
crazy stuff.
I think, is that,
We'll get into it more
Yeah.
later. So,
feels like that, if you're going for walkable, then 45 feels pretty fast,
So I think that piece will be something that we want to loop in other departments as well. It's something, I brought up preliminary with Earl and Public Works, because the town manages entrances onto Route 1 for most of that corridor until you get to South Freeport Road. That small stretch from South Freeport Road south to the town line is DOT, but other than that, Public Works manages that. Max impervious in both districts is 70%. It's not crazy high, as we'll see, so there's potentially room there for some adjustments. And then, a lot of zoning ordinances will have, some sort of maximum floor area allowance or maximum building footprint allowance. So in this case, our C1 doesn't have anything like that, but our C3 has a max floor area per lot, 40,000 square feet. So, yep.
that's not footprint, that's floor area?
Yeah, so it's total floor.
It's almost like a bulk standard. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, so you get into, I'll save it for later.
How does that go against your 70%?
If you have a 3-story building, each story could be, whatever that were, that was a terrible example, 13,333
Yep.
square feet on each story, right?
Yeah.
Just wonder why we have it.
Why is that even there?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like, you
So
can't have, you
it's-
could either have like a big sprawling low building or more of a, it's like,
It's just to limit the scale of buildings, right? Like when you have floor area and building footprint standards, it's typically, you'll see them in areas where you regulate like density through a land per dwelling requirement, but you'll see them more in like form-based code approaches where you're kind of okay with any use or density amount that goes into the building, but you really want to pay attention to the scale of the building that you're allowing. So we'll cover that more in a little bit. The next slide, hit the arrow on the wrong computer. So then I wanted to compare to what a few other mixed-use corridors in some nearby communities were doing, just to kind of see where we were compared to some other places. So Scarborough, Brunswick, and South Portland, these are three also mixed-use districts. Some of them in like the Route 1 area to get kind of a similar feel. You can see the minimum lot sizes in these areas are much lower for the most part, 10,000, 7,000, 3,500 square feet. The density, in the TBC district there in Scarborough is in, super high, 5, units per acre.
That's the old Scarborough Downs, where they're building that new community?
Can't be at 5 units.
Yeah, I think that might have its own special
Yeah.
zoning. Yeah. When I was looking at it, it seemed like it was a lot of commercial uses there, that there wasn't a ton of housing in that area.
Cabela's or something.
But then you get to, Brunswick and the South Portland at 15 dwelling units per acre, 24 dwelling units per acre. 15, you're looking at more of like a land per dwelling of 1 unit for every 3,000 square feet. And the 24, units an acre is,
That's the base.
a little under 2,000.
Scarborough Downs has tons of housing there.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought you said something about it not being much housing.
Oh, no, I was saying this district, the TVC district, where that area is, I was just looking at some street imagery, and it seemed like mostly like pharmacies and that scale of commercial development. Building height in these areas, 45 feet, 60 feet, 60 feet. I'm not sure we want to go to 60 feet in RC1 and C3, but, is there potential to go up a little more than the 35? Front and side setbacks, you can see, 15, like we have in the C1, isn't, out of the realm of what's happening elsewhere, but, is there potential? You can see in, some 0 front setbacks in the Cook's Corner area, there's clearly an effort to bring buildings closer to the street.
It must be the Navy base, where they're redeveloping all that housing.
Yep. Yeah,
They're
it's
building all
close.
these new internal streets. It's not really like, Route 24
built
or anything.
A ton of housing.
Oh,
up there.
boy. I drove through there
Yeah.
I'm right in there.
One thing that jumps out to me is it seems crazy to tie a minimum lot area to the use. Doesn't that seem like a bad idea? Like if you say, because what if you create a lot and then the use changes? And you say, well, now you're non-conform. It just seems like a recipe
Yeah.
to make non-conforming.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly why it was like that.
We
They,
don't do that.
yeah, I wouldn't do that. They might address it somewhere else in their ordinance too. Sometimes it's hard because, you'll have a standard somewhere and then
Right, so maybe it's
there's
like
a
little
hidden
flag
footnote or
something.
something. You can see the max impervious areas in these areas. Ours was 70% in the 2 districts we're talking about. You see 80, 80, 85 here, so it's a little higher. And then, so building size limits. So, C1, we don't have anything. C3, we have that 40,000 square foot floor area limit. In a couple of these communities, you see a 50,000 square foot max building footprint. That's probably really getting at, limiting more intense, large commercial leading into industrial uses or limiting strip mall type developments that might have.
Big box stores.
Yeah, right, your big box stores, yep. But then, in the Scarborough district, 10 to 20,000 square foot max building footprint. So really encouraging, more smaller scale commercial buildings. For reference, the apartment building that was proposed, we were talking about at the corner of Mill and Depot, that is like a 13,000 something square foot building footprint, 3 floors, so close to 40,000 square feet.
So max building footprint would apply to each building on a lot?
Yeah. So, yeah.
So you could have multiple buildings on a lot,
Yep.
each of which has that sort of footprint. I mean,
If you wrote it that way, you could write it either way, but yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Right,
so
you could
let's.
say like gross floor,
Yeah.
footprint of that. But I mean, in that way, I could see that as actually as a useful policy tool to say, hey, we don't want huge buildings.
Yep.
We would rather see more
Yep.
smaller buildings. I would definitely personally go much more toward building footprint than building floor area, because I think that makes more sense as a way to.
Yeah, so, right, I mean, that's, what we'll get into. I mean, the C1, if you look at all the growth area narratives, as you go further south into that Route 1 South growth area narrative in the comp plan, it talks about allowing apartment buildings, but maybe at a smaller scale than downtown, or encouraging more townhomes and things like that. So, right, maybe, you're okay with large areas of development on a site, but you want them broken up into smaller buildings, so. All right, so some other standards that we find in our commercial 1 and commercial 3 districts, you see some landscape setback requirements, 15 feet in the C1, 25 feet in the front in the commercial 3, encouraging either one curb cut per lot or shared access between abutting lots to limit those access points on Route 1. In the C1, you're allowed outdoor storage, but it's required to be screened. In the C3, it's just flat out prohibited. And then in the C1, we have this kind of specific provision that certain land uses are only permitted if they're at least 300 feet east of Route 1, or if they're closer, they're subject to some more intense screening standards. So we'll get to that. And then we have the section for performance standards for all the commercial districts in section 527, which we'll specifically get into later. So our 2025 comp plan calls out some specific recommendations that tie in very closely with what we're looking to do here. So you'd, 1, revise zoning regulations in all of our growth areas to permit greater building heights, mixed-use structures, and multifamily housing. So, we allow mixed-use structures in both of these districts. We allow multifamily housing, the uses. It's just really hard to build them based on our numbers. Permitting the greater building heights, 35 feet, I wouldn't say is a super high building height. We have the 45 feet allowances in some of our the village commercial districts, and now going up to 55 feet, but that's something we can weigh in on later. The next recommendation in the comp plan, adopt walkable design standards. So specifically looking at things like encouraging street-facing buildings, considering maximum front setbacks, and relocating parking behind structures. So some of this has come through in our design review update. Like, these are some of the things we talked about, especially having the primary entrances face the street, and that relocating parking to the side and the rear structures instead of allowing it in the front. And the maximum setback kind of ties into that. If you want to encourage parking to the rear and side of buildings, then you want the buildings to be closer. You don't want to encourage or require that people have some huge front setback and then also require the parking goes behind the building. It would just make it really difficult to develop. And then finally, reduce minimum lot sizes, yard setbacks, frontage requirements to allow for smaller footprint developments that can fit into established neighborhoods. So all 3 of these recommendations, they weren't necessarily specific to this corridor. They were more so specific throughout the growth areas. So they could mean different things in different districts. Maybe you take a more intense approach, right downtown in some of the village districts, But there are still elements of this that could apply and come through in the C1 and C3. All right, so where I kind of envision this going on a high level, and forgetting the specific details of, this number should change to this. The goals that I see coming out of this are, one, simplifying the existing ordinance in these two sections and making it more readable and usable for everyone. Like I talked about at the beginning, the C1 in particular is pretty complex to look at. Two, increasing density allowances to make multifamily development actually feasible. Saying it's an allowed use at this point is pretty meaningless when it's really hard to actually do one of those projects.
Do you see this as a repeal and replace kind of project? No.
The sections aren't that long, and the framework is there with a lot of the space standards that it'll be. A lot of it would be just changing numbers. So I think it's not necessarily going to be a lengthy amendment in a lot of ways, but changing a number from one number to a different number could have huge impacts. Consider other space and bulk changes. So things like reducing setbacks, increasing building height. Do we want to go down more of a form-based approach rather than regulating density artificially through a land area per dwelling? I think one of the council goals this year was to consider form-based code in, some area to try it out. I think it was brought up through the dog bone working group. It's something we'll talk about a little more when I have a density slide. LD 1829. So that's that new housing legislation that came from the state. So we have to implement changes for that by next summer, probably. They're going to go through rulemaking this fall, so we might get a little more detail and updates. But there were specific requirements in there for minimum lot sizes, if you're on well and septic, if you're not on well and septic, but you're still in a growth area. So if we're going to be in this section amending these numbers anyway, and we have to do that compliance in the next year, then we should probably just meet that now while we're already in there. And then clean up performance standards. That 527 section, we can go through what's worth keeping, what's not. If we are going to keep something, there's probably still some clarification work that's needed to make things more straightforward. All right, so now let's get into kind of each one of these slides is going to highlight a different area that I'd like to get some direction on, so feel free to weigh in on each of these topics. So the first thing that I want to bring up is land uses. So in the C1 specifically, like I said, we have this standard that, if you look at our list of uses in that district, you have the permitted uses, so your single family, duplex, things like that. Then you have your uses that are allowed with site plan review. And then, typically that's it. That's what we have in most zoning districts. But then in this district, there's another section that says, you can do these things only if they're, more than 300 feet or more east of Route 1. What was that?
Which are?
So the uses are multifamily, affordable housing developments, and then these four listed at the bottom here: warehouse and storage facility, telecom facilities, truck facilities, and solar farms. So you look at these uses and it's, I think fairly evident why someone might want those set back further. Whether the board still thinks all of these should be set back further or not, we can have that discussion. Open to hearing what the board thinks about those. But it's...
3 of those would have stopped my neighbors from doing what they wanted to do. One neighbor wanted to have a wireless tower, and the neighbors and everybody else did everything they could to stop it. My other neighbor, CPM Contractors, he was in a constant battle to try to get his thing up and running, and everybody tried to stop it.
Yep.
Previous town planners. And You know, he has a truck facility and, you know, now he has a storage facility or had a storage facility, and that was a constant battle as well. So, you know, and none of them bother anything.
Yep, so again, I'm completely open to that. The comp plan doesn't weigh in strongly on this topic. For the immediate conversation, it would be staff's recommendation that we absolutely should remove this restriction for multifamily and affordable housing developments, because that's supported in those kind of initial comp plan goals laid out. But, so, you know, one, I'd like to hear feedback on that, if the board agrees that those should be removed. And then two, would the board want to explore removing any of these other ones from that restriction as well?
I'll tell you that I definitely agree with removing multifamily and affordable. The others, I mean, I guess I'm not, solar farm, do we really want a solar farm anywhere down around Route 1? I mean, can we,
They
does it
proposed-
belong in that zone?
They proposed one
There was one that was, I think
up
was
on the
close.
hill.
Right, but do we think it's, you know, it's.
I hate the things.
Should, the others,
So again,
fairly
the,
different
like
on-
solar farms in those cases would be like principal uses. Like obviously if someone was doing like a housing
Right,
project or
right.
something, they could still
That's
do
what I'm talking
accessory.
about, just
Yeah,
Panels on the,
Yep.
you know, they're not all that attractive, in my opinion.
They're not. However, I'm certainly 100% in favor of removing the housing stuff. I mean, I think looking forward, if this is a growth area and we can sort of put our thumbs on the scale to influence the sorts of growth, I think if it's a nice area to drive through and, you know, kind of sets the stage for arriving in Freeport where we're promoting housing, my personal wish, I guess, would be to not be driving past warehouses and wireless communication facilities and truck facilities, and to make it a little easier to build housing and, you know, other sorts of commercial use. I mean, there's a pretty wide range of uses that are allowed, as Scott said in there. I mean, you know, we've got a car wash, there's a grocery store, there's restaurants, there's hotels, there's all kinds of stuff, and I don't really have a problem with any of it. But I think going forward, if we're going after walkable and we're going after growth, my personal preference would be to prioritize housing and other sorts of commercial uses, which is a long way of saying I would be in favor of leaving warehouse storage facilities, wireless communication facilities, and truck facilities with the 300-foot restriction. Solar farms, I think it's pretty unlikely that we're going to get a solar farm there, just because I think land prices along Route 1 are probably fairly high. Get it as a principal use. I don't like looking at them. I would certainly not wish that upon the community from an aesthetic perspective. However, I think the realist in me also wants to throw anything we can at like a renewable energy and energy prices, and if we can build local infrastructure that keeps energy prices reasonable for local people and produces renewable energy locally, I feel like we should probably allow that. That might not be the most popular opinion, however, I think I would stand by that.
Can we define truck facility?
I have to look it up.
Well, Kyle looks it up. Can I just comment on the solar farm?
We went through a whole big solar farm
Yeah,
thing. a
so
couple
the
years ago.
solar farm regulations aren't that old. It was a request that the council had sent to us, maybe like just pre-COVID. We did,
A ton of time on it.
yeah, we spent a lot of time on it. The technology's changing. I don't know how it's changed since we've done it, but they are limited. If we want to allow them, which the council did, they sent it to us to consider, the planning board, there are limitations on where they can be located due to the access to utilities. So you do see them allowed on the Route 1 corridor. We did have one proposed down there. I believe they actually did purchase land, but then they went away. They never got the final approval, but it is a newer use. They are limited where they're approved standalone just because of the connections. And that one, at one point, it had a distance separation. Kyle, I'm not sure if it's still in there, the solar farms have to be a certain distance apart. It might actually be in the, I see you shaking your head, it could be in the solar standards.
I don't remember exactly,
But yeah, they are, it is a newer use, and I think if it's something you guys should consider whether or not you like it, because we have seen plans for one, different versions, so if it's something you don't want, then I think it's a discussion you should have, because I think there's a reality that it could fit down there.
We put in big, my recollection, and I'm trying to find it, but
I
we
think it'd be
put
like
in pretty big buffering requirements.
Half mile apart or something, for a large one, I feel like there's a restriction.
I think it was,
in-
we looked at the big parcels, and I think
Performance.
where we came down was like, we never would get more than one in that area.
Yeah.
Or it would be very implausible to get more than one.
I think unless you put one on like each end, the one that came in was kind of right in the middle, so it would have been a limiting factor of where you could have put other ones. But just background in case it's helpful, because that's one of the newer uses. And I think, to second Andy, that zoning down there, like when I first came to town, Freeport was trying to prohibit certain things. So it is kind of wonky and cuts,
It was more negative than positive.
restrictive. Yep.
That was our first time working with North Star Planning too, right?
Yep.
That was, Ben was, yeah.
So just to follow up on the truck facility, it's defined as any building, premises, or land in which or upon which a business, service, or industry involving the sale, maintenance, servicing, storage, or repair of commercial vehicles, including heavy machinery, is conducted or rendered as a principal use. The sale of motor fuel and accessories or equipment for trucks and similar commercial vehicles is permitted as an accessory use.
So we have one now. Casco Bay Motors.
So there are also some other automotive uses allowed in the district. So other types of, like kind of automotive things that are allowed in the C1 that don't follow that 300-foot requirement are an auto repair service garage, auto service station, convenience store with gas pumps, boatyard, manufacturing and processing, construction services, R&D facility, car wash. I would say those are the kind of larger, more intense commercial uses allowed currently in the C1 that don't have to follow that 300-foot setback.
So let me just weigh in on the discussion of solar. I disagree with most of the comments that people made about solar. Compared to trucking facilities, automotive facilities, solar doesn't pollute. I agree with Sam that, there could come a time when distributed generation makes an advantage to have local solar generation in the community. That could be tied to local facilities, although that's not the way it works right now. It would go into the grid at this point.
But there's still, if you have locally produced power, you're minimizing transmission losses and generally
Right,
speaking.
right, but that's really
Yeah.
planning done by somebody who's
Yeah.
way
fair.
beyond the town
Yep,
level.
Yep.
But, I don't, personally, I don't mind looking at them. They're totally non-polluting. Doesn't generate car traffic. People are not going to, in and out driveways to visit solar farms. You could address aesthetic concerns with, the setback and, border, whatever you call the things that would block the visual view. I forget the term. Trees, buffering, trees, so forth.
A lot of that exists. Were you on the board, Wayne, when we did this
I
whole
think
solar thing?
I was.
A lot of that, I'm looking at this, like, this has got to be one of the longest subsections.
Yeah.
There's a ton of stuff in here.
Yeah, it duplicates a lot of existing
Right.
standards.
Mhm.
It covers like stormwater and things, so it's longer
So,
than.
so we kind of have that settled. And compared to every other way of producing electricity, solar farms are by far the most benign. So it's, I would like to encourage that at every chance we can. As far as the multifamily and affordable housing, I agree with what everybody else said. There shouldn't be any restrictions, and I only wonder why we focus so narrowly on Depot Street and not just go across the board on things like height restrictions, because we're encouraging it here, the comprehensive plan encourages it here. It
Oh,
would seem-
we're getting to height.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Down here, too.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that'll be, and we're very early on. We
Yeah.
still got like,
But my only comment is I wish we'd move faster on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so I think we can revisit this too. I mean, it's not going to be a hard change if we want to, these uses at the bottom here, if we want to kind of swap in and out.
One thing, I think, I didn't catch the fact that the solar farm was in the 300-foot, because I think within the solar subsection, which for those of you who are
So it's
curious.
in the C1 district list of uses.
Right,
It's,
300 feet.
yeah,
But so in section 534, which is the subsection that regulates solar energy generation systems, I think the buffer from the Route 1 right-of-way is already 150 feet built into that subsection. So even if we restrict or remove the 300-foot restriction, solar, there's a separate buffer of 150 feet. So even if we remove that 300-foot restriction, the closest they could be, without making more changes, would be 150 feet.
because it should,
Buffering requirement.
it should be, again, it's not, you can go closer than 300 feet for those uses. You just have to provide some like fairly robust screening of the use. So it's not impossible. They're actually, the bigger limiting factor for multifamily is that as you go within 300 feet, I think, of the corridor, the land per dwelling like shoots up to like an acre per unit or something. So, you can't,
De facto prohibition.
even if you wanted to say, okay, we'll put the multifamily closer to Route 1 and just provide a bunch of screening, you still can't do it because of the density allowances. So it's not that these things necessarily couldn't happen closer, it's just that they would require some extra screening.
I mean, I would feel differently about screening these types of uses than I would certainly about multifamily stuff, but it feels to me like we need to revisit that whole aesthetic. Like, we don't if we're going after walkability and growth and like inviting community, we don't want to be screening buildings. Like, maybe we need to think about basic regulation on how they look, sort of like the design review. I don't want to go full bore, but like if that's what we're after, that seems like it would be a better way to get to it. Rather than saying you got to plant a bunch of trees and hide everything, it might be better to say,
I'm with you.
you need at least some windows in the front. Like, you can't just put a big corrugated front.
It's gotta be
you know?
aesthetic.
Yeah, so I think that would be my
I could get on
preference.
board with that.
Yeah.
And we have the framework for that. The 527 standards have a building design section. So part of this will be, that section might be relevant there, but it probably could use some cleanup and updating.
I'll give you a good example. Down on Route 1 next to me, they got the hardware store. They made the hardware store, and back then it was Rollins Furniture when they built it. You had to put all this screening out in front so you couldn't see the building, and no screening on the side buffering me, the neighbor. I'm like, wouldn't it be nice if I got some buffer, so I didn't have to look at the end of a metal building,
And there's not really, the buffer hasn't really been maintained there, right? Like, all those trees are dead, so it's
Well,
not.
there's still some trees there, there's still some pine trees.
Yeah, there's still a couple, but it's like,
Yeah,
it's not like you can't see the building when you drive by, so.
No,
it's-
no,
anyway.
but still, it's,
Yeah, a lot of times these buffering requirements don't
Yeah.
actually adequately.
it just adds cost.
All right, that'll work for now.
The point is, I'd like to have some screening from the neighbor,
Yep.
not from the road.
Yeah, we do, in the C1, C3 existing language, it does have side setback buffering requirements for the length of the developed area. So you have to go as far back, but to your point, it's not the same level as the front where you're providing trees and all of that, higher vegetated cover. It's, it could just be a lawn area or something like that. All right, moving on. So, all right, talking about building height now. So the C1 and C3, we talked about, both have this 35-foot maximum building height standard. In the C1, you can go up to 45 feet only if it's screened, in this case, and located 300 or more feet from Route 1. So you can't just screen it and then have it closer than 300 feet in this case. So, question for the board. Is there interest in increasing the building height? You know, we saw it's a recommendation in the comp plan throughout the growth areas to consider increasing building heights to something like 45 feet or some different number that people would be supportive of for some or all of the district. So this could be a situation where you want no height increase, you want to go up to 45 feet or another number throughout both districts, or you want to allow whatever that new number is in some portion. You know, maybe you're okay with it in the C3, but not the C1, or within a certain distance away from Route 1. But as you start to get to those C1 lots, you know, further back abutting the rural zones, you know, maybe you're not comfortable with it. So what's everyone's take on building height in these areas?
I would go higher than 45 feet.
I would go to 45 feet, but I don't think I'd go higher. I mean, that's gonna be, you know, it's not like in town here where we have other buildings, you know, it's gonna be out on its own for the most part, you know, so you've gotta factor that in. It's gonna look more like those two buildings that went up in Falmouth, which are fine, you know, there were three actually, but right in the shopping center there in Yarmouth, or Falmouth, those two buildings went up.
Those are,
And they were kind of like, whoa. You
those
know.
are much taller than 45 feet, though.
Are they?
I think so. I think they're, aren't they like 60 feet?
Not sure about those.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're, because I think what happened is they increased the building height to, I think it's like 60 feet, or but they're close to 60 feet. And then everybody was so upset about the way they looked that then they reduced it again, which therefore ensures that they will always look out of place. So it
But also-
just is like,
Also, remember, with any building height conversation we have, part of LD 1829 is that if something is an affordable housing development project, it'll be able to go up 14 feet beyond whatever you approve. So if you did raise it to 45 feet here, if an affordable housing, you know, multifamily project came in on Route 1, you know, a year from now, or, you know, whenever, it could potentially go up to 59 still. So that is just another layer to this.
And Brunswick already has 60, right?
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of communities, I mean, the buildings I live in, you know, by the mall in South Portland are, you know, 6 floors, and
Yeah.
they're kind of isolated, like what David's talking about. You know, it's not a downtown area, there's not a lot of neighboring buildings, and, I mean, I get that point. It does feel, it's, you know, the scale changes dramatically from one spot to another.
it was the one like Robert something Drive, kind of like behind
Yep.
Home Depot or
Yep.
near. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. That gives me a little context visually. Maybe not for anyone else, but I drove back there not
Yeah,
too long ago.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, they're big, but yeah.
But so that might be the scale that you'd be looking at if you allowed the 45 feet and then affordable housing came in and, you know, added the 14 feet to it.
Well, I think that would be good news if that happened.
I think for me, that sort of increasing to 45 feet feels like the right spot to stop it for now. Yeah, especially given the 18, whatever,
1829.
29.
I guess my question is, we were forced to do all this screening to hide the stuff, and 300 feet back's not that far, you know? And, you know, all this screening and stuff, if you had a nice lawn or a nice field out there or some, you know, just some nice clean area out front, I'd rather see that than all kinds of trees and a forest of, you know, the cheapest plantings they can buy, you know, just to make a screening. And, you know, I'd rather see something more tasteful than just screening shoved in. And a lot of this must have come from, probably Carolyn can remember years ago, they talked about down Route 1, the big thing with FEDC back in the 90s was there were going to be all these little roads and all these little villages and parallel roads and service roads. And of course, you know, they all came to us and said, oh, you got to put all your land together. And we just said, write the check and you can run it, you know. But they had this vision that really never came to fruition. And I think some of this stuff comes out of that.
Yeah, so.
Really, and it never worked.
Yeah, so you can imagine if the goal was more of an automotive-focused corridor, where you have a bunch of like clustered developments, so you have kind of long access ways back through, you know, a large landscaped area, and then you have these, right, like little pocket villages type things set back pretty far. that seems to be more of what the ordinance was going towards versus what the comp plan, the new comp plan talks about, and some of the stuff we're talking about with promoting more walkability and, how far pedestrian infrastructure gets, extended down and, is really prioritized. But the idea of bringing taller buildings closer, pushing parking and, having less kind of landscape buffer requirements in the front setback area, you're just making things potentially more accessible from the road. The buildings become more of a focal point as you're driving along. They provide more of that kind of outdoor wall effect as you're driving down the corridor. So that would sort of be the shift in dynamic that you're.
I just don't know how you screen, well, if it's 300 feet back and you got a 45 or 50-foot building, how do you screen it? It's gonna stick up out of the bushes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you just try to make it look nice with some nice maple trees or something, but, just,
Yeah, I think that's, I think we'd potentially be looking at getting these out of that 300-foot setback requirement and just following whatever setback requirement we land on default for the district, whether that's the 15-foot setback or, it's reduced to 10 feet or, whatever it is. And then, maybe you require some just kind of visual aesthetic landscaping in the front just to make that kind of 5-10 feet look nice.
yeah.
But, you're not trying to hide the buildings. The buildings become the focal point going down the corridor.
And I don't think everybody believes seeing a building is an ugly or an unpleasant thing. I mean, it could be a nice thing.
Depends on what the building looks like.
And if you got a nice looking building up against the road and solar farm out back, you're never gonna see the solar farm.
Right.
So, I mean,
The building could be the screening.
yeah, or could have panels on the roof. Yeah.
All right, so I heard a couple people okay with 45. I think Wayne was interested in potentially going even higher. Any other thoughts on the number? And then following up on that, for everyone, were you okay with that number being applied everywhere throughout both districts?
I think simplicity and
Consistency.
consistency is a good thing.
All right, let's move on. All right, so lot size. So this is where we might not have quite as much of a say. So minimum lot size is just simply the amount of land you need to make a legal lot. So we're not talking about density requirements here. We're just saying, imagine there's a large piece of land in one of these zones and you want to carve out a new lot, or do a subdivision. You're building a new frontage road somewhere in this area and you're carving out a bunch of lots to put duplexes on each lot or something. How much land do you need for that legal lot? So LD 1829 is going to require, if you're in a growth area and you have access to public water and sewer, your minimum lot size in any community that meets these conditions can't be more than 5,000 square feet. In a growth area with no public sewer, which I think parts of our C1 might not have access to sewer.
What's the definition of, so if you imagine you had say 10-acre parcel and the sewer runs along the front and you want to make lots in the back that are, do they all have to, because the original lot that you're coming from has access to water and
You
sewer?
could connect the sewer in. If you're proposing that they're going to be served by sewer, then you could propose them as
But if you
5,000
didn't
square foot.
want, for some reason, if you didn't want to deal with the sewer extension, like if that, because wouldn't the,
I think there's a requirement that you have to connect into what public utility if there's like a reasonable connection to be made, and it's like one of those, to the maximum extent practicable
who
things.
determines, because it's not cheap
I
to,
think the board would.
the-
So I imagine like a very large financial impact.
but
would
if somebody
be-
said, all right, I've got this 10 acres, I want to subdivide it, but I don't want to connect it to sewer because it's going to cost me an extra $150,000, you could do that maybe, theoretically?
I think you can make the argument that it's just not feasible to
Yep.
do for whatever reason.
Subject, you have to pay a non-connect fee for every unit.
A non-connect fee.
Yep,
Is that is that a thing?
yeah.
Shouldn't be a thing, probably.
So it's like you could, but you aren't, so we're gonna bill you.
That's right. Because they've gone by the front.
I charge people who didn't want smart meters for their electricity. They pay to not have one.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I know in Yarmouth, this is like top of mind, because Yarmouth just enacted a moratorium on sewer connections, on development projects that are required to connect to the sewer, and so anything with frontage along a road that has a sewer line is required to, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about
See,
it.
they don't have a district, and they've sued quite a bit of the town. Back in the day, Yarmouth sued most of Yarmouth, and if you weren't on sewer, they would come pump your tank every 3 years on the town's tax bill, on the tab. And because of CMP leaving, they've changed a lot of those regulations now, because it's costing money, but Yarmouth owns the sewer, and Freeport, we have a district that's quasi-municipal,
Gotcha, okay.
so it's a whole
Interesting.
different deal.
Whole different deal. Anyway, I'm basically in favor of this. This seems pretty reasonable to me. I was just curious about how creating new lots in an area where a big lot might be served at the corner, but like the back of it might not be served, how that would play out. But I think in general, this seems very reasonable to me.
I don't think anybody's gonna go to if they're gonna develop the back of the lot, if they can run sewer in, I think they're gonna.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we'll get in a spot where somebody's gonna go in
That's
and just.
probably reasonable.
They probably would for the density,
Yeah,
you know.
right.
Right, if you can get 4 times the lots, then.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the district is served by.
It all is.
Yeah, I think, there's some spots on South Freeport Road some of the C1 lots kind of branch back.
Oh, maybe
there
on
that
South
might
Freeport
have,
Road,
like,
yeah.
a couple, but
It
yeah,
might be.
most of the district is.
Yeah. And it goes, I think it goes under the road to the old county road as well, to the nursing home.
I think there are a few stragglers that are still on old septic systems down there. There used to be a couple wells, but I don't know if those have all converted. I believe Kyle's right, there was a property on South Freeport Road, I think you had to go so far to connect for sewer that
Yes.
it was really like cost prohibitive, but I
I think
don't.
up past the Y, there's a couple houses up past the Y.
I don't think it's many, but I think you'll need that provision in there.
Yeah, I think maybe Ken Guimond's office building might not be on sewer.
Yeah, we're gonna run into this a lot in other areas with LD 1829, because there's also, what's not included here, because it's not relevant for this conversation, but the idea that you're not in a growth area, but you have water and sewer. I think there might be a couple areas. Now, there are a couple of spots in our rural zones where that might need to allow 5,000 square foot lots, which is gonna be weird, but.
Yeah, we might need to tweak this before we bring it back to them too, because if it's like LD, the last LD, which I'm blocking on 2003, is that right? There was that provision that you could put in like this quasi-public sewer, like these community systems, so we can kind of look at that a little bit before you bring something back.
Maybe rulemaking will add clarity.
Yeah, but if you're trying to get ahead of it,
Yep.
we could get some guidance on that.
Okay, so for now, we'll go with these numbers. I don't think this necessarily means that the Route 1 corridor is going to see some huge influx of 5,000 square foot lots. Maybe it would, but yeah, I mean, technically, single-family homes are allowed, you could have, but that more means that, one of the larger undeveloped kind of areas to the back on the east side of Route 1 could turn into a denser single-family or duplex-style neighborhood back there. All right, now getting into the fun stuff, density. So right now, we regulate density in these two districts through a land area per dwelling unit requirement. So one way of increasing, the next two slides are kind of assuming that we want to increase density, by the way. So if anyone feels differently, we can have that discussion, but we're kind of operating under the assumption here that that's the goal. So one way to do that is we can reduce those land area per dwelling unit requirements. If we go back up here, in C3, it was 7,000 square feet, so, around 6 units an acre. In the C1, depending what style of project and everything, it's anywhere from 10 to 40,000 square feet of land that you need per dwelling. So we can reduce those numbers to make it more feasible. So LD 1829 requires that the first 4 units on a site only require 1,250 square feet per dwelling unit, which is basically saying, they're saying you need to allow a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, and on that 5,000 square foot lot, you can have a 4-unit structure. That's
Sort of an echo of
Yeah.
2003.
Yep. And then it's saying beyond those first 4 units, a municipality can't require more than 5,000 square feet per dwelling unit after that. I would say 5,000 square feet per unit doesn't really make larger scale dense housing all that possible. That's still only, 8 units an acre. I mean, that's not really that dense when you're talking about multifamily level housing. I'd say if we were going to keep a land area per dwelling standard, you'd probably want to consider something just flat out between 1,000 and 2,000 square feet per dwelling unit. I think I get to on the next slide that VC1 has a 0 land per dwelling standard, but that the project on the corner of Mill and Depot is 51 units on a 0.89 acre lot. So that would equate to a land per dwelling of 1 unit for every 760 square feet. So, we might not want Route 1 South filled with that scale of building, but if you're okay with that level of density, then, you would want to consider a lower land per dwelling, probably somewhere in that 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 square foot range.
So does LD 1829, when it says 1,250 square feet per dwelling unit?
Yep.
Now, do the first 4 units have to be in their own, does it have to be a 4-unit building, or can there be 4 separate units?
No, it could be 4 separate units. You could have 4 detached, single-family homes on a lot. Yep.
Interesting.
My gut reaction is just take the 1,250 and just say that's the density.
Yep, that's one option. So the other option to get away from land area per dwelling that I wanted to lay out is option 2, using more of a form-based approach. So, right, in our VC1, we have a 0 land per dwelling requirement, meaning in our VC1, you can put as many units as you want into a building as long as the building meets all of the other requirements. We could do something similar here, and if the board wanted to regulate the scale of buildings a little bit more, we could add in some other types of bulk standards to regulate the scale of a building instead of artificially regulating how many units you can put into a building. So one option that some communities use, especially in more form-based codes, we don't have here, but we could introduce, is called floor area ratio, where you take the total floor area of a building and you divide it by the lot area, and that gives you this FAR number. So the standard in the ordinance, you would have a FAR of 1 or 2, and that's what you would allow. And it would allow you to remove land area per dwelling entirely, and your density would be limited only by things like FAR, setbacks, max building heights, if you wanted to have a max building footprint, things like that. And then people could just put in whatever number of units they wanted. The idea here is if you're going to lower your land per dwelling to 1,000 square feet anyway, that's allowing 43 units an acre. So if you're going to lower it that much, do you just want to go to 0 and then regulate scale in a different way entirely?
43 units per acre is a lot of units.
It is.
Yep. So doing more of the form-based approach says, we're, right, 43 units is a lot. We don't necessarily care about the number of units so much as we care about the look and feel of the corridor we're creating. So, we don't want a 50,000 square foot building footprint in the C1 because we don't just want this, endless wall of building, being the first thing you see as you drive into town. We're okay with a bunch of 10,000 square foot footprint buildings, though. What FAR does is it limits the total floor area on the lot. For instance, a FAR of 2 would allow a 20,000 square foot building on a 10,000 square foot lot, but that 20,000 square feet can be, if you allowed the 45-foot buildings, you could have a 4-story building, 5,000 square feet on each floor.
Twice, right?
Yeah, and then, let's
Two of
say
those.
you do, right. So there's some combination in option 2 of other metrics aside from land area per dwelling that you could use to kind of create the shape and form of the corridor that you're happy with, without picking a land area per dwelling number.
Yeah, my first thought, actually, before we even got into this slide, is like, what could a ratio offer, and what would the incentives look like for a developer if there were a ratio instead of land area?
So,
But I'm not totally, I think it's just that I would need to spend a little more time kind of imagining some of the like extremes of, you run the thought experiment, okay, what would the most extreme version of
So
any
I
of these be?
the good thing with a floor area ratio compared to like what we had now in the C3 district, where it just said your max floor area is 40,000
Right.
square feet. Well,
If you have a huge lot.
yeah, that's great if there's a huge lot, but it means nothing on a 5,000 square foot lot. No one's having 40,000 square feet of floor area on a 5 or 10,000 square foot lot with a 40-foot building height when they have to provide parking and all this other
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So the floor area ratio standard is a little more transferable between regulating scale on both large lots and small lots.
Yeah.
So that's where the benefit of it comes in versus a strict standard of regulating max floor area as a whole, just to prevent like big box stores.
I almost see it too as, I wonder if there's a combination, or if you have both standards where you do floor area ratio and building footprint ratio.
Yep.
Because that seems to me like it could like narrow the allowable designs, while still allowing, I think, quite a bit of flexibility for people with projects. But you could say, all right, you can't build like this, a big box store. You can't, you could find a way to limit a big box store while still allowing lots of flexibility around it. So you could say you can't just build a single story, 40,000 square foot structure, but you can get to 60,000 square feet as long as your building footprint is smaller. So you could just sort of massage so I think with the right combination, I would be in favor of moving toward some sort of ratio, but it would take some time to figure out exactly what that looks like. But I do see the benefit of, like, you don't necessarily have to, because I think if you go for a density requirement, like a traditional density land area per dwelling unit, then that just, I think it doesn't allow as much.
It's not as flexible
Yeah, it
because,
doesn't allow as much
if someone
flexibility.
wants to do a multifamily building of studios and 1-bedrooms, they're going to be smaller units, and they could fit way more units in than if they were doing 2- and 3-bedroom units. So if you're basing, a density calculation off of, we'd be okay with a certain number of, 1,000 square foot apartments or houses or something, But yeah, I mean, I think either ways would be, massive improvements over what we currently have. It's more of a preference thing.
I think sort of getting to that LD, I mean, I guess there's a question for it, like, what happens if LD 1829 has this requirement that's written, like the requirement itself is written in the language of land area per dwelling unit, but we don't have that.
I think we could still do it, like, if we went with something like option 2, we could still do it like the VC1, where we have a land area per dwelling requirement and just make it 0.
Which actually gives that gives communities a workaround, right? You say, well, our land area per dwelling is 0 and our max building footprint is 14 square feet, you know,
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
it's like.
there's loads of workarounds to LD
So,
1829
yeah,
with the way it's currently.
yeah, interesting, okay, anyway.
Um,
Does anybody else have like a preference of which way to go in the early stages
Yeah.
of this, of,
Guess I don't at this point, no.
yeah, I feel like I'd like to see a ratio personally.
I mean, I can mess around with some options of what 2 looks like. I mean, it wouldn't, again, like, it's not going to require a ton of writing this out in the ordinance. So
Yeah.
if the board sees it in a draft form and doesn't like it, and we just want to go with the land area per dwelling at 1250, you know, across the board, that's fine too. You know, I think the other thing to consider is, you know, we're talking about 2 districts here. So again, you know, is there
Different,
difference between, you know, what you want to see, and maybe if we're talking more about doing some more of the form standards, it might be a little easier to differentiate between what the board wants to see entering into some of the village districts compared to the whole way up, you know, Route 1 South.
yeah, I think at this stage, we just throw a dart for a ratio. And then refine.
And then, so following up on that, so increasing density allowances, you know, is probably the key takeaway for this whole project that we're undertaking. Again, the existing ordinances allow, you know, super low number of dwelling units in these areas. We went over that project math before. Just for reference, for, you know, if you wanted to look at that project on Depot Street in terms of the floor area ratio, right, that's like a 40,000 square foot building on a 38,000 square foot lot or something like that. So that would be a FAR of approximately 1. So when you're starting to think of what a FAR number means in real life and scale, that's kind of what you'd be looking at.
So one of the examples you gave was a FAR of 2, which is an even, so that's way more dense, right?
Yeah, but it would be limited by other things. So just because you meet that standard doesn't mean you meet
We
all
still
the
gotta
other
go parking,
standards. You
we
would
still
still
gotta have
have
setback, yeah.
your building height limitation of 45 feet.
Yeah.
So, you know, you might be under that FAR allowance if it was set at 2, but you would be capped off by some other standard,
Constraint, yeah, okay.
whether a building footprint or a building height
I mean, I
standard.
think scaling back slightly from the downtown, that scale seems like a good
I agree,
target
yeah, yeah.
to me for now, for this place. I think it's like, but at the same time, maybe that's just a good kind of benchmark. Because it could be bigger. I mean, it could, you know, could be, so, FAR of 1, 1250 seems like decent.
Okay, well, I'll mess around with it and, you know, bring
Good
back.
if we
I mean,
can see,
I'm all for increasing density,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I
mean,
think
it's-
that's the
it's
key
all-
point that I want to
Yeah,
get at here.
yeah,
Is
yeah.
anyone, one, at a base level opposed to that idea? And then I don't think so, but I just, you know,
I'm not opposed to increasing density, but I'd like to see the fact that we've got other permitted uses down there,
Yep.
that we should help them out as well.
no, I agree.
You know, we're slacking up on housing down there. We have a hard time getting housing built in the downtown, which was the big goal, was to build downtown. We got one guy on the docket now. We've lost 2 that were proposed. One had a permit and lost it. One never brought his permit in, got a permit and didn't build. And now we're trying to, you know, I mean, I think we gotta have more. I'm not opposed to any of it, but I'm just saying, you know, there are boatyards down there. One guy proposed a 9-lot office building, he just got pushback all the time, for silly reasons, you know? And, so I just, it's not the only use down there is housing.
Yep.
Not opposed to it, but I'm saying, you know, there are other uses down there we fought hard for years.
I think we just have to keep pushing to make things less restrictive generally.
That's right, that's where I'm going, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, those other uses
We got
are,
we got going boatyards down there, we've got, you know, antique shops, we've got new office buildings coming in.
yeah, the Green Pest building, they
Yep.
just got approved for the new
Yep,
building.
so I'm saying, you know, it's not just housing down there, there's probably a couple of lots, somebody could put housing on down there. And, there's only a couple of big lots, really, And
Yeah, and I mean, that's really
So-
the point, is it's a mixed-use corridor. If you really want to encourage some of that walkability and accessibility, you want
I just find,
commercial uses too.
personally, I just find that a funny word on Route 1 South.
No, I,
Walkability.
even if it's not,
I'm one of
walk-
the few people that walk up and down Route 1, and people say, how dare you do that?
even if it's not walkable, having close access to some of those.
Right, but it's not just about what it is today, it's about,
What was gonna be.
it's trying to support what it could be in the future.
Oh, I
too.
understand that, I understand that. But, you know, every time I ask for a wider shoulder, somebody says, no, we need a sidewalk. And I'm like, no, bikes go by and they need a wider shoulder on the southbound lane. And people look at me like I got two heads, you know? And then they say, well, I ride up there and it's not safe. Well, that's because it's not wide enough, you know? Focus on things that are real here, not, and kids are gonna walk to the Y. Well, no kids walk to the Y. They either ride in the bus or the parents take them. You know, so I'm trying to balance things, you know, what can we get accomplished in the next 10 years? How can we build out the downtown and work that way? And, you know, we wanted to put people in the downtown so that they could walk out of their house and walk out to places downtown and fill this out. And I just don't wanna have the next shiny penny all the way down the road. So, not against it, but I'm just saying, let's try to build out the downtown too. Which is supposed to help the stores and do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so moving on, max impervious is the next kind of topic here. So your maximum impervious allowance is shown as a percentage. That's, you know, all impervious on the site. So your building, your parking, anything that's not vegetated, really. So in the C1 and C3 currently, it's 70%. You know, you saw in some of the sample community examples, it was, you know, 80, 85. In our V1 and VC3, currently, you have 80% allowances, and VC1 and VC2 are at 90%. So these are the kind of, you know, as you go north out of the C3, you know, these are the districts you hit along Route 1. You know, I would say for a growth area, for a mixed-use district where you're trying to encourage development, 70% seems a little low. You know, if you had an acre lot, you'd be looking at 13,000 square feet of vegetation versus, you know, 8,700. If it was 80%, you know, that's 4,300 square feet that could be used for a new building or, you know, some other amenity or something like that. You know, it'd still give you 20% vegetated cover to provide landscape setbacks on the side and the rear, provide some space for some stormwater management and things like that. But I wanted the board to weigh in on this kind of based on what we've seen so far in the presentation.
Seems so I remember when we went to 70, it was much lower before, it was like 50% years ago, which didn't work. That's why nothing got built, and that was the idea, is to
Yeah.
build nothing down there. And we pushed to 70%, and I think unless you change this, back then, I think with the setbacks and all that stuff in place, that was about maximum. The setbacks at the time, when you take in the setbacks and all that stuff, it was,
So we're also doing smaller lots.
oh, I understand that now, but back then,
Yeah,
70,
yeah.
that's how we got to 70% was,
That makes sense. So, you know, just real quick, let's say, you know, you have a 10-foot front setback, right, and 80 feet of frontage, that's an 800, right, that's easy math, I didn't need a calculator for that one. That's an 800 square foot, you know, vegetated area. And then, you know, you have kind of that same distance back, maybe a little more on the sides. So, yeah. With the smaller lots, if there is reduced setback potential, then I think that would inform somewhat of whether you wanted to increase the standard or not.
I could see increasing it to 80, but I also would acknowledge that this is not really my area of expertise at all. It just seems like maybe.
Well, I agree with you there, but I
Yeah.
mean, it's, you know, if we're trying to improve density,
Yeah.
you know, it's
So,
just
yeah,
another.
Exactly. It's like, all right, yeah, exactly. It's a twist of or another notch on the ratchet. And say, all right, go to. But I see what you're saying. I think with smaller lots and. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to encourage some smaller lots,
And
the smaller the lot, if that percentage stays lower, not that 70 is crazy low, but, you are going to have more difficulty developing on the smaller.
And I think we have to keep in mind, what is our, like, what do we want, what are we going for, and then what other standards are coming into play. So if we want a denser feel with moderately sized buildings, and we're regulating setbacks and buffers, and we're the site plan and all this stuff, so people are gonna have to do stormwater management to make sure that we're not just saying, all right, you can pave 80% of it and just dump all the water right into whatever you want. I mean, so there's other protections in place. I feel pretty safe with 80 as a.
Yeah.
All right, parking. So currently, we do not have any design standards for parking in either of these districts. There are obviously minimum parking requirements, but there's nothing really that talks about the design or location of it. So one of those comp plan goals at the beginning was this idea of shifting parking to the rear or the sides of buildings. So this all ties together, right? If you're bringing buildings closer to the front by reducing minimum front setbacks, it kind of lends itself naturally to the idea of your parking would then go behind the building. And we see this, especially, in the C3 district. There's a lot of existing businesses that locate their parking like this already. As you get into the C1, I think it's less common. You start to see more parking lots in front of the buildings, more of the strip style or, but, especially I think in the C3 area where you are closer to downtown, it does help to promote that better walkability. There's easier access off the street to the main entrance to this, the apartment building or the business, whatever it is. It can be more visually appealing. You're not looking at a parking lot. So yeah, maybe you don't need all those screening standards so intensely if the building is closer and the parking area is not as visible. So what's the board's appetite on standards like this? Is it something that, you'd be interested in seeing in the C3 and not the C1, not at all? Or, maybe everywhere, or any
I think there
strong
should be some
feelings?
parking in the front down C1.
Yep. You could also limit it too. I've, been in places
Some.
where,
I'm just saying there should be some parking in the front.
yeah, where, you could limit the number, you could allow, right, limit it to a couple rows in the front, but require the rest of it be to the side.
That's right,
or the back.
that's right. I'll give you an example. Down there with right across from the bookstore there where the Chinchets have that 40-acre, 39-acre subdivision there, they tried to bring in something, and they wanted all the parking in the rear, so they put the door in the rear, and the board complaint was, well, we don't like the look of the door in the front, we want a door in the front. Well, I can't use the front, I can't have cars parked out front, why am I building the door? Well, we don't like the dormer either, put a dormer on the front. So they wanted to make it look like there was a front, but they couldn't use it, because everything was in the rear. And it just dragged on, he lost his tenant. Because every month they'd have to have a new thing. And, I can see, have 10 or 15 cars parked out front so it looks like somebody's home. When they're driving by, it doesn't look like an empty zone. I mean, I still don't like the looks of Patriot Insurance over in Yarmouth. Beautiful building, it's too close to the road, all the parking's in the back. I mean, it's just a wall when you go down through Yarmouth.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about there because,
Yarmouth forced him to do that. He wanted to have it parallel to the river.
yeah,
And Yarmouth forced that on him and twisted his arm.
yeah. But it's an interesting, because I think by the same token, hard to imagine, right? But if you drove through downtown Freeport and all of these buildings were set back 30 feet and there were like diagonal parking lots in front of each one of these buildings, that would be a less.
There was at one time, diagonal parking in front of all these buildings. Or parallel.
Because the street's narrower. I'm trying to say, like, if everything's further back, it has a very different feel. So I see what you're saying, and I'm wondering, I think it's a good point, I'm wondering how you achieve the feeling of greater density without getting to feel like there's nobody home. Like,
Yeah.
what's the thing that makes, there's a question, I don't know. what's the thing that makes it feel like it's a inviting and useful place? Is it like sidewalk cafes? I mean, is that, not that we're going for that in this, but I'm just wondering how, you know, what are we trying to encourage? Are we trying to say we encourage parking to the side? I mean, is it like if you have a building that's close up, but you can see, you know, you can see like a courtyard in the front where there's, I mean, like the Harris-Seekit Inn or something where there's like a little bit of parking in the front, but most of it's way out back. Is that the kind of thing?
I think like Main Beer too. I think they have some parking
Yeah,
in the
they have
front, but
two rows,
The
but
bulk of their
bulk of it's
parking
to
is
the
to the
side.
side and the rear.
Yep.
So, I mean, I
Yeah.
could see that style being what, you know, we promote through policy.
Because you're not only gonna have housing down there, you're gonna have
Right.
stores and other stuff is gonna come if you relax some of these.
Yeah.
Encourage it.
It almost makes me think of like a build-to line of like, hey, your building should be within 30 to 50 feet of the right-of-way, and you should use 20 feet of that for parking or something. I don't know. Those are.
Well, I just think there ought to be an option, if somebody wants to have his business with a front door,
Yep.
you know, if he's not on a service road or something like that, and he's got a curb cut and he wants to pull in, you're driving by 45 miles an hour.
Yeah, I mean, I can come up with something, the C1, where it's, you know, the bulk of it is, you know, promoted to the side and the back, but you allow some portion,
Yeah.
you know, in the front
I
to
like
allow
that.
for the option.
Yeah.
I would strongly prefer to encourage it to the side and
Yeah.
rear.
What about the C3 as you're getting closer to downtown? Same thing, or?
I think the guy ought to have the option, the person ought to have the option. If he wants to put it up and put all his parking out back and that works for him, that's fine, but don't force everybody to do it. You know, if he wants to set his building back from a little bit and have a nice big front entrance and 5 cars out front, at least so it looks like there's somebody home, you know? Got a little restaurant, you don't want everybody parked out back.
Good point.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not only gonna be housing down there.
Yep. Yeah, I guess I would lean more toward, as you get closer to town, encouraging the buildings closer to the street. But I think some flexibility is good as well, so.
That way, I just,
Give you enough, Kyle.
I'd hate to see just a wall, I mean, we talk about just a wall of buildings down Route 1. And a lot of this stuff, I've lived there long enough, I don't think a lot of this
Yeah,
stuff is
I-
gonna happen anytime
I
soon.
think part of it would be straight, like, it would be very different. If the speed limit were 30 and there were parallel parking, street parking all along there,
Oh, yeah.
that would feel totally different than blowing by with, like, it feels like you're in a train tunnel or something, you know, where it's like, you're,
Yeah,
so.
I just think
I mean,
realistically.
I don't think we need to, I don't think we're at a point where we want to start talking about reducing speed down.
No.
Something like that,
no.
You know,
So that's-
and thinking about it more of almost the downtown area is not, it's.
Right.
yeah, out of
No, that's
town.
where, I'm just trying to think.
We also don't need to, you know, this comp plan will be good for the next 12 years, you know? I mean, addressing just the, you know, cleaning up some of the mess in these districts, the density, the building height, that's already a massive change. I mean, there's going to be ample time to revisit some of these topics, I think. So, I mean, even switching to some language about encouraging to the side and rear and putting some sort of maximum limit to prevent, you know, like a big box store with like a massive parking lot in front is, you know,
But we're never gonna have one of those down there.
I'm just,
But I think, yeah, I mean, if you limit, I don't know, what's
Never say never.
if you had 2 rows of parking, that's, each parking spot's 20 feet deep with a 20-foot court, so it's like 60 feet. So if you said, building at the front of your,
Yep.
or parking at the front of your building can't be more than 60 feet wide. Something like that.
yeah, can't have more than, 2 rows of parking and, you know.
That would be kind of a reasonable.
Has anybody ever mentioned having parking lots, like along Route 1, host walkways or biking paths? Because, for instance, you can walk from Royal River to Main Beer until you get to a thicket of trees by Main Beer, but you can walk through the parking lots and stay off the road for quite a distance. And if every parking lot were required to, you know, contain this right of way for pedestrians or bikes, that would be an interesting way to situate a safer path.
I think that's already in down there, Wayne. I mean, they forced connectivity on parking lots years
Yeah,
ago.
we'll get to the whole pedestrian access piece. That's part of the 527 standards. It's one of the things that might have a good intent, but in practice, it hasn't necessarily worked that well, and it needs some cleanup, and so it's something I want to get feedback on from the board. It doesn't just apply to parking lots, it applies to all development projects, but, you know, we'll get to that. All right. And then, so finally, we're on setbacks here. So
So there's no appetite to change the permitted uses there is there now, correct?
I haven't brought it up as a topic. If the board wants to, we can explore it, but,
I just,
yeah.
I fought hard to have single-family and two-family as a permitted use
yeah.
down there,
Yeah, I wasn't,
to preserve the people that were still living down there, not having to go through some kind of foolishness to work
Yeah.
on their house. So we have 2 or 3 permitted uses.
We've added a couple of uses over the years down there, like the car wash.
Yeah, but that wasn't a permitted use. These are permitted uses without site plan review. Single-family, two-family, and agricultural is permitted without site plan review.
yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I wasn't planning on
Okay.
proposing any changes there. You know, I mean, there's some of the, you know, maybe larger lots towards the rear on the east side there, you know, maybe a denser single-family or duplex subdivision could work out. You know, I don't know if there's tons of space for it, but.
You get the hots for that back lot on Route 1, don't you?
What?
You get the hots to develop that back lot on Route 1,
I'm
don't you?
saying that any
Somebody's
of
calling you, aren't they?
Any of these things could happen back there, not necessarily that they will all
Oh, yeah, they're
happen.
calling.
Well, you can't really have a ton of single-family homes on the west side because the land's just not there, so. All right, so setbacks. So we have a 15-foot setback requirement in the front for the C1. You can get down to 5 feet on the side and the rear, you know, if you're abutting commercial uses or have shared access. In the C3, like I was talking about, there are more substantial setback requirements. So you actually have a 50-foot setback requirement in the front in the C3 right now, if you have your parking in the front. So you can envision the typical C3 requirement, if you put your parking in the front, would be you have a 25-foot landscape buffer, and then you can have like a row of parking for 25 feet, and then, or more, and then you could have your building after that. Or, you know, you could have your 25-foot landscape buffer, then your building, and then your parking behind it. Either way, I mean, I would say just as you know, Sam, you just mentioned kind of as you're getting into the C3, heading into the downtown, if you want to make that more of a smooth transition into the form of what downtown is, maybe we want to look at decreasing that area more specifically than the C1.
I'd be in favor.
The side setback in the C3 is kind of weird. You don't have it's 75 feet total side setback. So you have to do at least 25 on either side, but you could do like 25 and 50 or whatever, 37.5 and 37.5. And then you have a 35, yep, my reaction. And then 35-foot rear setback requirement.
Why did we do that?
A 35-foot rear
It feels like the
setback?
kind of thing that was done to solve like two separate people had a problem
Yeah,
that were like
possibly.
slightly different. It was like, well, if we just do it this way, then you can do that and you can do that, and then it'll be fine. Like, this isn't right. I mean,
Yep.
I mean, I know we did we made a targeted change for AEC engineering, right? But hopefully it wasn't that weird. I don't even remember what we did exactly.
Yeah, that was about a buffering requirement around like the entire industrial district or something.
Yeah.
It wasn't that specific.
Hopefully it was better than that.
So, all right, overall setback requirements. C1, I think, you know, they're, based on what I'm hearing from the other topics we've discussed, maybe C1 is fine, but if people are in favor of changing those, we can have that discussion, but is there appetite to reduce setbacks in the C3 to make it kind of more of a lead-in to our village areas where we have lesser setback requirements and more of that walkable feel with the buildings closer to the lot?
I would say definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And definitely get rid of that weird side setback thing. The rear setback,
So something like maybe like 5 or 10 feet
On the side? Or,
front setback for C3.
That's right up on the street, though, you know? And once again, are you gonna start some kind
not
of
just
a,
from the right of way.
Yeah. So again, 5 to 10 minimum doesn't mean you have to do that. It's just gives the option to do it if someone wants to.
I would do, I forget what the front setback is in the V1. Is it 15 feet?
I was feeling like 5 or 10 feet's a little close.
I would
It is.
do whatever's in the
15
V1.
So V1 is actually 25, which is pretty high.
That is high.
So the VC one is, I think, 5.
That feels too small.
Yep.
That's a real downtown setback.
Yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, yeah.
I
it
would,
is.
I would say like 10 or 15.
I'd say
Well,
15.
doesn't C1 have two setbacks, east and
15,
west
20.
side?
15,
The
like 15.
setbacks, I believe, are the same.
You sure?
I'm fairly sure, so we can go. The setbacks are the same. It's the lot area and the land per dwelling that differ.
They didn't used to be. They were different on one side of the street than the other. Because of the narrowness of the east, or the west, excuse me.
Yep.
Yeah, I think 15 in the front and the C3 seems like a good, I think I'm thinking in the V1, I'm thinking of my house, which is vastly
You guys
non-conforming.
just have non-conformance,
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
It's about 15 feet, but it's non-conforming.
Okay.
all
And
my
then
neighbors.
the side and rear as well, bring those down to 15 or different number?
Yeah.
What's behind that section when you start talking about C3? Say the west side, what's behind those? There's condos back there, right, for quite a bit of that.
Yeah. I guess I would worry less about I would put the side at, 20, 25, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm like, 25.
So remember, the C1 is, you can go down to 5 on the sides, or 15 if you're, residential uses abutting each other.
Right.
And it's 15 in the rear.
So,
So
yeah,
C3 is getting closer to downtown.
So 15, sure. Seems reasonable.
So it's, okay, yeah. So we're talking like 5.
But yeah, if someone wants to take advantage of, putting a row or two of parking in front of their building, they can still do that. They can set the building back 50. Based on these comments, it doesn't sound like the board would be interested in this time in implementing like a maximum setback to force people close to the road. But that is something brought up in the comp plan. Maybe it's a future discussion, could be a conversation now. That's when you really want to start getting into, all right, we're going to try to make this area walkable. We don't want to give the people the option to put businesses 50 feet back. We want the main access to be off the road. So if the board's not at that point, it's something, we can revisit at a future date. But that's an option as well if people were interested.
Yeah, but we use that word walkable a lot. And then we sit here and say we want to jam the buildings right close together and densen them up. So I don't know how the setback has to do with walkable, as far as
If
whether they're
you're-
5 feet apart or 25 feet apart. What's that got to do with walkable? If there's a sidewalk out front and there's an entrance to it, if they have to walk an extra 10 feet to get into it,
The closer buildings are together, smaller lots, the more buildings you can put in a space, the more things in those buildings, the less distance people have to walk to get to certain goods and services. So you could have,
well, they walk to Shaw's now.
I'm not saying people can't walk distances, but in the same distance you could walk to get to 2 things, you could walk to get to 20 things, or, something like
Is
that.
that the look we want? When we
I'm
say
not- I'm
walkable,
not saying it's the look you want, that's
say if
that's
you've
what
got
I'm-
buildings 10 feet apart, all the way down C3, is that the look we want?
Yeah, that's what we're here.
Are we willing to trade a different look to say it's walkable? That's all I'm trying to get to is,
I mean, I don't think,
would it be pretty to walk by if they were all jammed right cheek to jowl against each other?
yeah, I think the C3, I mean, the C3 is always going to be a little bit of a funny zone because you've got LL Bean basically right in the middle of it, right? The big corporate headquarters.
Just north of it. It turns into I-2 or something, or I think part of their parking lot might
And you
be.
basically got, you got Gritty's building, you got the bank, you got a few things, then you got the housing on Viney Road, and then you got a couple of restaurants, and
What
on the
about
other side, you
am
got
I
some stuff.
imagining that it comes further, that it doesn't come as far north as it? What about the west side of?
So this is the C3 here. So you have L being here.
Oh, so that's all
and-
VC.
And then it turns into VC3 for a tiny little
Gotcha.
corner, and then it
I thought
turns
that
into
was-
VC1.
Yeah,
It's that little section right there.
I thought that was all. So like where, I forget the name of that little kind of U-shaped road that
Yeah.
goes where they do the Christmas trees in the winter.
Yeah,
and
that's
the-
Independence Drive.
There you
Yeah.
go. So that's not C3.
No, that's, well, yes, it is, isn't it? I know we changed it here a while ago. These maps are too,
I think that's VC3, right?
That's VC3.
Yeah, it's
All right.
like
No, my
just
bad.
up here.
My bad.
Yeah, so the C3 is not a massive
This is that little
geographic
business that we
area.
did that
Right.
thing for recently.
And then.
Yeah, I mean, you have the Varney Heights project,
Yep.
which was approved down in that area. There's an undeveloped lot here on the west side that's a decent size rectangular lot just north of Shaw's.
yeah, that's 8 acres.
Yep.
The one that has the old house on it.
Yeah,
Or not, yeah, not undeveloped, just for its scale, it's not super,
Yeah.
developed.
It was on the market recently.
Really?
yeah.
I don't know if it's sold or not.
Oh, I think so, yeah.
Wow.
They took the sign down.
Which property?
Is it, you could drive by, or I should say, I did drive by it for like 5 years before I realized it was there. It's after, there's like, I think it's Bean
Quidditch
Sprout, or
Road.
it used to be Bean Sprout, the daycare after
Yeah.
Shaw's that's up on the road. And then it's like a big hedgerow of
Right.
cedars that are, and they really effectively screen, there's a big old colonial house back there. Nice looking old house. That you, yeah, unless you're looking for it, you miss it.
Right.
Used to be just maple trees out front, and the last tenants just planted the whole front. It was beautiful. There was just a row of maples up both sides of the driveway. And once you could just see it sitting up on the hill up there, then the last, 25 or 30 years, the tenant, the owner just planted the whole front thing full of bushes. So,
Very
too
effective,
bad, because
screen.
it was a beautiful house up on the hill with a beautiful, row of maples, and just always feel, it's their property, but I always felt bad. It just sort of ruined the look of it.
All right, moving on, building footprint. So we talked about this a little with the density. It seems like this might be something board wants to go down a little bit. If we get rid of the land area per dwelling and go more towards kind of figuring out a scale that we're talking about. If we do want to kind of separate the style and feel from the downtown, one way of doing that is introducing these kind of max building footprint standards. So, maybe you're okay with more of a floor area on some of these lots, but you want to spread it out to multiple buildings that are smaller to prevent these kind of massive, large buildings in either of these districts. So right now, the C1 has a building footprint limit just for retail uses of 15,000 square feet. So it's not actually in the space and bulk section, it's in the list of uses. When it says retail trade as one of the uses, it clarifies that it can only be 15,000 square foot footprint. The C3 does not have a building footprint standard, but it has that gross floor area standard of 40,000 square feet. So that would be for all floors total through all buildings on the lot. These building footprint standards typically used to prevent disproportionately large buildings, support better stormwater management because you're breaking up the buildings with vegetation in between instead of having a massive building that's sheeting runoff off. And then, it encourages, more vertical building as well. So if you're talking about raising the height to 45 feet, maybe you have a smaller footprint, but you can go up higher and that leaves more space on the lot for, other amenities, more vegetation, gardens, solar, whatever it is. All right, so it seemed like before the board was somewhat interested in combining this in the density conversation. So again, I can kind of mess around with that, but just to follow up specifically, is there a difference between what the board sees in the C1 versus C3 in terms of the scale of buildings that, you know, you'd be comfortable with in those different corridors. So getting closer to downtown and, you know, further south as you go past Main Beer.
It seems odd to me to limit a retail use in C1 as, when you're not limiting other, like, I don't see the purpose of that.
I don't know if that was specifically to target big box stores, you know, so you can't
maybe.
have like a Target or a Walmart, something like that, but I'm just
I
guessing.
feel like I tend more toward the form-based approach, I think, to the C1, because it feels like we're trying to set sort of, if we're trying to encourage a wide variety of uses, but we want it to feel a certain way driving through, or at least we want to prevent a certain type of building from coming in, it seems like form-based approach is the best way to exclude a certain type of building that would elicit a certain type of feel as you drive through while allowing the maximum possible flexibility. Does that make sense? So in that case, I would want to remove a restriction that's specific to a use and try to find a way to restrict the thing that we're trying to restrict, no matter what use is in that.
I follow you, Sam. I like that.
So,
You don't want a 40,000 square foot footprint, whether it's used
Yeah,
for
exactly.
housing
It doesn't
or
matter what it is.
retail or warehousing.
so
Yeah.
so I think and 15,000 square feet, I don't have a great sense for how big is it. That's
Pretty good
big.
size.
Yeah.
That's
What
pretty good
number did you
size.
15,000 square feet. It's pretty big.
Yeah, I mean, a third of an acre over.
Yeah.
Must be the one next to me. I wonder how big the hardware store is and the,
So I measured, I think Main Beer is a 31,000 square foot footprint.
The whole building.
Yeah,
Including all the brewery out back
I'm
and
not
all
sure
that stuff.
exactly. I was just looking at our tax map quickly before and saw that number.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably exactly what it was preventing some sort of big box store situation.
it was,
yeah.
it was. It was to shut us off from having retail
Yeah.
before they got
So-
downtown.
So maybe building footprint, I mean, that feels like, maybe that's the right number? I don't know. But if we do want to
15 or 30 or?
15
Yeah.
for a building footprint, not for gross floor area, but for building footprint. And I just feel like the two zones to me should have, like, the numbers can be different, but they should be regulated in similar ways.
Mm.
So, does that make
It's a
sense?
continuum in a sense.
So maybe like the C3, so, I mean, for instance, you know, Main Beer, some of the hotels, I think in the C1, other uses, I think are gonna have a bigger footprint than 15,000 square feet in the C1. You know, you do have some of those warehousing, manufacturing, offices, R&D uses allowed in the C1. And to Andy's point, I mean, if you want a mixed-use corridor where people, you know, can live and, you know, maybe work right next door, you know, maybe in the C1, the number goes up a little, but the C3 is 15,000 square feet, you know, as you're getting closer to downtown. And that's how you differentiate. And C1, I don't know. It's
Next time, why don't we pull up some numbers to see what different buildings are down there?
Yeah,
I'd be interested in a building footprint limit, and then, I forget the term for the ratio.
Floor area ratio.
Floor area ratio, as opposed to a max gross floor area. It feels like,
Like, what's the size of Powers Engineering? What's the size of the hardware store?
So going along that, would you be interested in like basing a max building footprint off of sort of the existing condition of what's allowed in the district now? Or would you,
I would want to.
it would be better to not introduce new nonconformity, right?
like, would you be okay with another Main Beer popping up at 30,000 square feet? In which case you
It's a
shouldn't.
matter of how it looks.
Right, that's
Matter
the
how it
issue.
looks.
Which you can address separately.
Right.
We have another section, you know, that we're gonna get to for design standards and things like that. So, you know,
Could be,
it doesn't
yeah.
have to just be, you can prevent metal blank walls, you know, aside from.
Or it could
the
say, like,
standard.
you can be 30,000 square feet, but your street-facing facade can't be longer than 100 feet, or something like that, you know? So you can't just have like a never-ending.
I just think it's hard to sit here and look at these numbers on the wall
Yeah,
here,
totally.
and then try to translate it to,
No, I-
you know, what it looks like in real life.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
visual, so that
Next
helps.
time I'll bring back, maybe next time if I bring back like a first draft of proposed language, I can accompany it with, I
Some
based
examples.
I
Yeah.
based this number off some
Yeah,
examples,
yeah.
Would you have access to illustrations that might show these different scenarios?
Yeah, I could show like street views of, either planned elevations from plans or street view
Could
pictures.
probably
of-
use, that Varney Height, or this one that was just
Yeah.
approved back here is.
I mean, things to show the contrasting choices that we might be.
It's easier to sort of visualize these things
Yeah.
if we have some kind of a, so I was just staring at the wall here and thinking,
I
okay, what's that
agree.
number mean?
Yeah, it's also, like, I don't have Google Earth on this computer, I have it on my other one, but that's a good way to just really quickly be like, well, that building is
Yeah.
27,000 square feet, So I could probably put it on this computer quickly.
It would also be nice to see illustrations of what we're trying to prevent, so a
Right.
building with that is too big a square footage,
Yep.
what does that look like? Why would it be so bad?
Yeah.
Yeah, like what is the length of the front of a Home Depot? I have no idea.
Yep.
Probably pretty long. 400 feet maybe?
Yeah, probably something like that.
Somehow I always go to the wrong door.
I might be able to
Walk the entire length.
put together some of that,
Senior
because this
steps.
certainly this wouldn't be ready, I'll get to it later, to put a draft together for the October meeting. It's gonna take a little more time than that, but maybe in October can bring back some of, these types of things. So we can have a follow-up on this part. All right. So next, we'd be getting into, that's sort of it for the space and bulk standards aspect. Your lot size, lot area setbacks, impervious area, all those sort of dimensional requirements. That pretty much covered everything. So the remaining piece is to take a look at section 527, which is the performance standards for commercial districts. So we have this extra section in the zoning ordinance that applies, these standards apply to all of our commercial districts, so C1, C3, and C4 specifically. Knowing that we might follow up on this in October with some more visual examples, do people want to get into this part now? Or if we were going to stop, this would be a good cutting off point. If people's eyes are glazing over. But we can also keep going. There's probably like 5 slides left in this.
Let's get it done. Get it done?
Sure.
Can I throw in a fun fact for everyone? The Bean corporate headquarters is about 400,000 square feet of floor area. Building footprint, sorry, not floor area, building
Building footprint.
footprint, according to my very quick Google Earth. So,
Yeah, it's pretty large.
that's a big building. Okay.
So that is I2, but office buildings are allowed in the C1 and C3. So, if someone did want to do a larger office building, and the board should think about that. Is that, something that, we want to promote?
Given its design and setback, it doesn't really bother anybody.
Yep.
And the front of it is about 360-ish feet.
Yeah, I think you'd
Street
be
parallel-ish.
hard pressed to find a lot in,
I was gonna say, there's only about 2 lots down there you can put it on.
that could
Yeah.
handle
But I just,
something
it,
like that.
yeah.
All right, so the 527 standards cover a few different things. One of them is building design. So this area is not in design review, but this section sort of acts like a very miniaturized, pulled back version of design review, complete with some of the, problems we have in our current design review, where in some of these design sections in 527, it uses language like so-and-so is preferred, or, it doesn't necessarily give a specific standard. So I've kind of summed up all of the building design standards here from 527. And it would probably be worth people's times to, kind of go through this on their own and look through this ordinance section so they can really digest it all. But just on a high level, some of the things covered in here are, you have to add design features to prevent long monotonous buildings, you can't have uninterrupted span of wall more than 50 feet. You need architectural details on the front and side edges of roofs. All sides of the building should match or complement the most visible facade. You know, that's one of those ones that's a little more subjective, maybe, you know, matching and complementing. What does that mean? Metal siding installed in a single direction, not permitted on a facade more than 12 feet tall or 50 feet long. Facade elements should be coordinated with the landscape plan. That one always kind of confuses me. And overhead doors should be designed to not unreasonably stand out. You know, so when you have some of those warehousing truck facility uses, you know, the potential for overhead doors, I guess. You know, Green Pest, their recent building had overhead doors, but they put them to the back, so it really wasn't an issue.
Yeah, but that, I mean, it's that sort of thing. If it's designed to not unreasonably stand out, then are you just trying to make it look like the facade, and then you just have this big blank facade with a door like kind of hidden? It's almost better to just make it look like a door.
Yeah, I mean, it adds some clarity in the ordinance. You know, it shouldn't, you know, ways to make it not stand out, or I think through form and color and other sorts of things. So there is more detail in the ordinance than what I've written here, because it wouldn't all fit, but these are sort of the general ideas. So kind of first impressions, high-level thoughts on regulating building design in the C1 and C3. Are there any things that jump out here that should just instantly be deleted without, you know, any further consideration? Are there things that we might want to look at that aren't covered here at all? Any first thoughts?
How do you coordinate facade with landscape?
That's one I'm very confused on. I can't say that in the applications for site plan in the C1 that we've spent a lot of time at the
Well,
project.
there hasn't been much
review
built.
or talking about it. Well, I mean, the Green Pest building,
Oh, yeah, but
you know, I mean, that, it didn't really come up. I've looked through other, you know, past C1 approvals in the last several years, you know, for some of the other projects. I don't know that I've seen
the
that.
fight over the
highlighted.
garage doors was over. Everybody stood up and screamed, "We don't want a VIP on Route 1 South." That was the fight. So they limited the garage doors. So when Napa is, used to be a car garage, and on the north end, there was 3 bays on the back end. They put them around the back end of the building, on the end of the building.
I guess my feeling, Kyle, is that many of these should stay in some form. You know, we've talked about that a lot this evening, about how does it look? You know, that's what we need to get to. So, yeah, but, you know, cleaning them up and, you know,
Yeah, making sure they make sense.
the language isn't, you know, wishy-washy, or it's just make it as
I would say the
straightforward as
striking
possible.
the landscape element,
Yeah.
coordinating with the, I mean, maybe we should at least consider requiring a landscape plan, or we should consider in which cases a landscape plan is required and what should be in it, but saying that it has to somehow coordinate with the building, like those two
Yeah,
separate
yeah,
things.
two separate
The building
things.
has to look one way,
Lands-
maybe,
right.
maybe we want to encourage certain landscaping, but like,
Yeah. I just don't know how you define that.
Coordinate.
Yeah, right. I mean, we already have landscaping and buffering requirements.
Yeah.
I got
Yeah.
cedar trees, now I need cedar clapboards. Like,
Yeah.
what's the
All right, well,
joke, sorry. It's-
we can take a stab at just kind of clarifying what's there, maybe adding some specificity to some of this. And then if we were going to add in the future, you know, maybe in the C1, you allow a larger building footprint than in the C3, like, you know, to allow like some of those existing uses to be conforming. But maybe you wanted to add, you know, the primary facade wall can't be more than a certain length. That could go into this section, I
It
think.
needs to be broken up with a certain
Yep.
something.
So it's something to think about, I think. You know, first step, we can work on just clarifying some of the stuff that's there, getting rid of that landscape provision. But if the board wants to think about maybe other things that they'd be interested in seeing here, and coming back next time with that, that works too. All right. Pedestrian access. So this is kind of what we touched on before. Right now, there's a provision in the section that any new development has to provide a 5-foot wide walkway between parcels when development is proposed if the abutting property is also developed. So if the abutting properties aren't developed, you don't have to provide the walkway. The problem with this section is that there's no real specification of what the walkway is. It, gives a bunch of examples of materials that can be used from, gravel to crushed stone. It doesn't have any kind of specifications, that it needs to meet any sort of accessibility requirements, that there's a limit on the grade. There's no language about requiring a public easement. There's nothing about, requiring maintenance of the pathway. And I think in multiple times, the project review board has foregone requiring an actual walkway and just said the property owner should work with the town if the town's ever interested in putting a sidewalk in the area for better connectivity.
I mean, it does seem like the town is in the best position to
Yep.
deal with pedestrian connectivity. I mean, otherwise we're just always gonna have a patchwork of like, well, I wanted 3/4 crushed stone
Yeah.
for something.
So does there need to remain an easement across this
Well,
area
yeah,
for
that-
potential, future trail development?
Well, my next question was to the same point. What is the existing Route 1 right-of-way wide enough to allow for a sidewalk? And if so, does the town have enough jurisdiction or say within that right-of-way to do it if they wanted to?
Most places it's 50 feet at least.
The right of way?
Yeah, so I think it's something I'll,
Widens and narrows, but it moves, it's
The
pretty.
traveled way on Route 1 has got to be like 40 feet.
No.
I think, no? Even with the shoulders there? It's pretty wide.
Well, there's two 11-foot lanes, and the northbound lane's got an 8-foot shoulder on it, the southbound lane's got probably a 4-foot shoulder on it, so it's not very wide.
But you get around that by requiring parcels to maintain the walkways, right?
It would just require a big,
yeah, so the issue is that if you want these access ways to be used by the public, you'd want some sort of,
Consistency.
right, like consistency. You don't want to go from, pavement to some other material, you'd want real standards behind it, and you'd want, maintenance requirements like we have for stormwater functions to make sure they're actually operating. You'd want some sort of easement for public access,
Right.
you'd want all this stuff. So the two options here are, one, you can kind of get rid of this provision and just leave it up to the town to develop pedestrian infrastructure in a more kind of complete, holistic approach, like, okay, we're ready to develop sidewalks in this area, let's just go in and do a bunch of these all at once. Or if you do want to keep this kind of lot-to-lot approach as development comes in, knowing that you're going to have gaps because there's existing development, or there could be lots that just aren't developed, so you're going to, have just gaps in the system. But if you are going to do it that way, then there needs to be like far more substantial standards than what currently exists to manage it properly.
Do we have standards somewhere else, like in the dog bone or in the complete streets reports? Do we have anything that we could adopt and say,
I mean,
these are the standards?
the closest thing we would probably have is like sidewalk standards in our subdivision ordinance, something like this. But this is going to the point of what's existing is not requiring a fully blown sidewalk. Do you want to require?
It's not really a sidewalk, it's a connector.
Yeah. So if
You're
you,
basically telling private property owners they gotta connect to the next guy.
right.
Right, but if we're not going to get to the real kind of paths for 20 years, this would be a nice improvement to have right away.
it feels to me like
gonna happen, though.
requiring, so if we required a right-of-way for future improvement, if we said, all right, if you're gonna, if you come in and you've got some site, we require that you take the front 10 feet and you preserve your setback such that, just as like, sure, you can plant some shrubs there, but just know that someday we might come and we
Yeah,
might
that's
take
what-
it back.
that's-
I don't think it'd have to be 10 feet, or it could probably be 5 feet.
5 feet,
So if
sure.
you have that
Some
15
amount,
foot
I guess my question then is what happens with existing lots that don't have that? Like, are we always gonna have a
Well,
patchwork
it might
where.
be, no, I mean,
there's-
you'd have to, I mean, if the town really wanted to do that, I think they would have to,
Eminent domain.
you know, go through eminent domain and take that, you know, strip, or not, maybe not take it, but take an easement on it.
Yeah.
But even short of that, a patchwork is better than nothing. And as I said, like I could walk from,
How can you have a patchwork of a trail network that goes 25 feet and stops,
Well,
and then
the more-
goes another, you know?
my point is, the more you could avoid walking with the cars on Route 1, the better. So if you can walk a distance without going on the road, even if it doesn't go you all the way, it's still an improvement.
I think I agree in principle that it would be great to have that. I think where I struggle with it is if development and flexibility are the goals in this district, I think any sort of path that is well-built and where there's performance standards that make it something that's desirable, it's gonna add a ton of cost to all these projects. And so I feel like if we allow the flexibility now, while leaving open to the best of our ability with the limited policy tools that we have, if we allow for a future holistic approach, that I think the only way, like, the ship has sailed, basically. The only way that this is ever gonna make sense is if there's enough development to warrant a town investment, and then the town is gonna have to take the lead and build the infrastructure. I think in the interim, we might, while I certainly agree in principle, I think we might be better off just leaving the door open for the possibility in the future and leaving the barriers to development low for now.
So one piece of sidewalk got built years ago when, where Royal River Foods is, it was the Maine Wildlife Gallery, and they forced him into building the sidewalk. And that's the only piece on Route 1, and all it does is keep the water from running in the ditch,
Can I
because it's
just
poorly designed.
piggyback off Andy? I think the town, in particular, the project review board, has struggled with various components of 527. It's been amended over time. I think to what Kyle said, it is important to take some time, not at 8:45, but to look at that section and the applicability, because like for the building design, it's applicable anywhere you can see it. In particular, I think the board struggled with the lack of clarity on what Andy, I think, best explained on this connection requirement. It's not designed to build out a public sidewalk, and we've seen so many things. We've seen some easements, we've seen it waived because there are pockets of wetlands in particular on the westerly side. We've seen cases in C4 when Divine Capital came in and they did the housing. They worked with the town. They met the connection by putting the sidewalk in the public right-of-way down where the truck facility is. They were also going to work with the town to put that in. But in other places, there is a patchwork, I think somebody said there, that you don't notice. Like when you go to Antonia's, they were supposed to have a little gravel path that connected to the brewery. When you go to Napa, they were supposed to, or Classic Custards, they had like a little path that connected to air and water quality. And it's so that you could kind of walk between the sites, not necessarily this whole sidewalk infrastructure. So if you look closely, there's a patchwork, but it looks like many different things. But I do think this is something worth revisiting or flagging for higher ups, you know, the council to decide if they want to do something. Because I do think this is something that the board struggled with, and it's not clear to developers when they come in what the expectation is.
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I think you're making exactly my point. There is a patchwork now. The patchwork could be expanded by a requirement for a 5-foot wide path whenever anybody builds something. And, you know, I don't see why that would be costly, and I don't see what the harm would be.
I think
Yeah.
I have gotten feedback recently on projects that it is just an added cost. It's not as costly as,
It's a setback anyway, so why is it costly to maintain a
Well,
5-foot?
it's not always in the setback. Like, I've seen it
Not necessarily along
further
the
in the
road.
lots, further back in. I do know there's a big interest, especially with Connect Freeport and some other groups, to get some off-road trail connections down there. And so I do think
it
either out front
also,
or the easement out back could be valuable.
it also increases the impervious area on the site, so it takes away sometimes,
Why is it impervious?
because it's a walkway,
It could
then
be dirt, it could be gravel.
that counts.
gravel is still impervious.
What
If
about
they
dirt?
pave it.
You don't have to pave it. I mean,
But it's, I mean, the definition, like.
You just have a lawn.
The usual town, so I think where this is leading me, so I think, like, one bad outcome is a patchwork that nobody uses that just costs money. Another bad outcome is we cost money now, and, well, I guess the continuation of that is then we have to redo it in the future, and so two different parties, presumably the current landowner or current developers and the town, both have to pay for something. So to me, it's like, we should identify the path, like, is it the first 5 feet after the right-of-way? Or is it some location that you can draw a continuous line, and we say, all right, everybody needs to preserve these 5 feet. You don't have to do anything with it now, but you need to know that this is the 5 feet where we have a right-of-way, where someday a path could go in.
Yeah, but there's already a right-of-way there. The public has a right-of-way down Route 1.
And if that's adequate, then that's
So-
Yeah, I think
fine.
my
Yeah,
first-
no
They're
matter.
they're just not using it.
I think my first question would be to, like, Earl and have a bigger conversation about, right, the width of the existing right-of-way, and does the town have the ability at some point in the future to generate sidewalk or bike lanes or wider shoulders, whatever it is, down the whole length of Route 1? Or would there be a need, if we wanted to have sidewalks, down the whole way, to require those easements at the fronts of
It
property
would
lines?
certainly be preferable from, especially if we're talking about this sort of mixed-use development, it's like, it's not really, at least for now, it's not really on a walkable scale. We're not talking about lowering the speed limit. So anything that's within the existing right-of-way is gonna be right up against cars that are, not that I've ever gone 50, like I said earlier, but, cars going 50, 55, 60 miles an hour sometimes. So, I think,
Well, that's my point. It's-
yeah, it
it's
would
the
be
lack of
preferable,
safety.
right, it would be preferable to have it be further. From an aesthetic and usability and safety perspective, it would be preferable to have it further from the right of way. It sounds like, I think we're circling
Well, I think
some
we're talking
agreement.
long-term versus short-term goals. I'm saying in the short term, I don't see why we shouldn't add to the patchwork we have to make, to install paths that are away from the road, and even if they're not gonna be exactly in the same line with some longer-term goal, adding to the ability to walk away from the cars down that corridor would be helpful.
I think where I would tweak rather than disagree is in trying to outline for development where the path is most desirable and give some clear definition about like a goat path, 2/3 of the way back in your lot is not acceptable. It needs to be in this location so that everybody's is continuous.
Right, but that's where costs versus not so much costs become, because the more standards you apply, the more costly it becomes.
But I think if there are clear standards, most developers would say like,
I think-
clear and consistent standard.
You're
is-
gonna, the big things are materials, because right now it says, you can make it materials such as, let me just pull up the exact language, because it'll be easier.
Just, public's got a right of way. They should use it. Well, when Mass Landing wanted to go down next to, Sunrise Cafe up behind, they demanded a sidewalk to add to that development, and the developer and the owner of the parking lot just, no deal. I won't build it. There was plenty of parking area there to walk through. I've walked through their parking lot plenty of times when I used to walk up that way.
Doesn't everybody?
We do have a general, at the PRB level for site plan, we have a general pedestrian access standard, so.
They
when-
demanded a sidewalk from him. And
But-
he said, no deal.
So within a site, pedestrians should have the ability to navigate around. That doesn't require connection to an abutting site, but
So if I have my residence backs up against a development, do I have to give up 5 feet of my lawn for a walkway? Am I gonna be forced when there's a 50-foot right-of-way out in front of my house?
no. So the way this is worded currently,
It's only what's in
it
the
happens as development is happening.
Right. It's only new development. It wouldn't be you.
But, so currently it says a pedestrian access at least 5 feet wide connecting abutting parcels shall be constructed on each parcel where development is proposed. If the adjoining parcel is developed, the access should be designed to relate to existing facilities on the abutting lot. Materials might be asphalt, stone dust, or wood as examples.
Wood?
If the abutting lot is not developed, the plan shall contain a statement that says that continuous and consistent access will be created when the abutting lot is developed. The board may waive this requirement if no reasonable access is available due to, for example, the presence of wetlands and or steep slopes. So, I mean, at a minimum, if we want to keep this, like, things need to be clarified, like specifically materials and maintenance and, access easements.
Why can't we
and
lower the
things.
standard to even include dirt?
I think if you do that, if you include dirt and vegetated lawns, you might as well probably get rid of the rest of the materials because everyone's just going to do that. So if that's all that's desired, then sure, but no, if you include those sorts of things, I doubt developers are going to go out of, they'll just include a mowed 5-foot wide strip of grass in their front setback area that meets both their landscape buffer requirement and the walkway
Yeah,
requirement.
and that's what I'm saying would be a cheap outcome for the developer and a benefit to people.
I mean, it wouldn't be accessible in any sort of way. So if you're looking for a pedestrian access standard that provides accessibility from lot to lot, that wouldn't accomplish it, which is fine if
In a
that's,
patchwork nature, it will accomplish it to some extent.
I mean, if someone's using a wheelchair or something
Well,
like that.
Right,
yeah.
you're talking about ADA type
Yeah, yeah.
accessibility. Yeah.
Right, that's what I'm saying. There's
General
no ADA type accessibility standards built into this as it is. And if you went to even like more natural materials, then that would become even harder. Now, it can still help out in some situations. I'm not disagreeing with that. But if the goal is to provide, this unified access for everyone, it's
Well,
probably
that's basically not going to happen for a very long time.
Right,
Unless,
right.
sidewalks to standard are built.
So we've definitely identified this as a tricky issue.
So I can get a little more info on the existing right-of-way piece.
that would be really
And if there's space, and then we can potentially revisit and go from there for now. All right. But at least it's flagged as being something we'll need to pay attention to as we kind of go on with this. All right, vehicular access. So another thing that, we need to work, the board and staff will have to connect with Public Works on, I think, is this idea that in 527, there's an existing requirement that new access points on Route 1 should not be closer than 300 feet to existing access points. So this is obviously to limit curb cuts on Route 1, and, you have shared access between lots being encouraged. So you might have one parking area span, multiple lots, but just one driveway into that lot. This is to prevent kind of constant driveway entrances on Route 1 with people turning out every 50 feet. Now, the thing to consider is that we're talking about reducing lot sizes, potentially required to reduce lot sizes based on state law. So do we want to pursue reducing that standard that requires access be more spread out? Or do we want to require that if you are going to do those smaller lots, that you're going to be encouraged or possibly mandated, to provide shared access or use shared access?
Can I ask a question? Why is it a big advantage to have the same number of cars turning in one spot than having the same number of cars turning in multiple access points?
Having the frequent curb cuts, you're going to have people trying to turn at the same time, and it just creates more issues than one, from a traffic perspective, than one person pulling out at a time from one.
You'll have that many more people turning into the more limited, curb cut, right? So I'm not sure why, in my mind, I'm not sure why it is preferable.
It's a little safer to have.
More predictability.
So you say, like, imagine you're in a line of 5 cars, and one turns, and then the next, and then the
Right.
next, and then the next, rather than everybody just turn, I don't know.
Well, and then you can plan your traffic patterns, if you need a turning lane, you can put one there, if you have,
If you had a turning lane, that's different.
So doesn't,
But if you have a certain volume. you-
mainly Custard or whatever it's called now, and is it Napa that's next door to it?
Yeah.
Don't they share?
They don't, it's a mess.
Yeah.
Really?
It's a mess.
Well, there's no, yeah, it's just very unclear when you pull in there, like what.
You have to pull right in front of
Going
the,
which way and
it's-
what's the,
yeah.
you know,
you
it's
have to
like.
pull
That's
right in
true.
front of the custard place where, you know, they tried to put a curb cut up the other end, and nobody let them.
I'm just saying this restriction doesn't really change the volume of traffic turning off the road on,
Right.
into a driveway.
But
Right, it would
if
be
you have
more
smaller
about
lots and you've got it-
multiple people making exits
Same time.
onto Route 1 at the same time from very close proximities to each other, potentially, 50 feet away or,
Those same number of cars may be backed up, waiting to turn.
right, they would be queued in the
At one point
parking
as
area.
opposed to 6 points. Right? So it might back things up into that property.
Yeah, in the parking area, but they would be stopped and kind of out of the, anyway, the Public Works Director approves highway entrance permits and curb cuts. So this is a conversation that has to be kind of, I think, jointly with Earl. But again, I just wanted to kind of highlight this as something that we'll need to consider. It's one thing when you're requiring 3-acre lots or, acre lots, and you're spreading out the access points. People can't really do access points that close to each other anyway. But if there's the potential for some smaller lots, then it becomes more likely that you could have access points closer together. And I'm not sure if it's a hard requirement or. So the new access points on Route 1 shall not be closer than 300 feet to an existing access point to the greatest extent possible. So it's not a
Not absolutely.
hard.
You can't get defined shared use, and you've got a lot that's,
Your road frontage is
you can get yourself
250
curb
Yeah,
feet.
and I think Earl will typically, when he's weighing in on this, we'll look at, site distances and things like that, He's gonna look at the actual feasibility of it. So if it's 200, maybe it's fine, if there's no other option.
This is only new access points on development, correct?
Yep.
This doesn't have anything to do with the ones that are already there.
Correct.
Okay.
So just another conversation that we'll kind of follow up on as we're going through here. All right, and I think this is the last one, signage. So I believe the sign ordinance through the ordinance committee, there's an update going on for that. However, that's our separate sign ordinance. It's outside of the zoning ordinance, that regulates signage throughout the town. In these 527 performance standards, we have specific signage standards that apply to just the commercial districts. A lot of these have, language that's not real specific. For instance, the one freestanding sign per building is preferred, one building sign per building side is preferred. The one thing that we could explore here is deleting this section entirely and just taking anything that is of use here and implementing it into the current sign ordinance
In
rework.
favor of that.
So we don't have multiple sections of our ordinance regulating the same
Yeah.
topic.
Totally agree with that.
That
I don't think-
definitely simplifies
I
it.
don't think the planning board should be in sign land.
We've done the same thing with our design review update. We took signage out of the new design review update, so this would kind of be consistent with that.
Yeah.
If everyone's good with that, I think, we can kind of generate this list of standards, see what's already covered from this list in the sign ordinance rework, and see if there's anything else that would need to be taken from here that would be useful as including in that.
We just need better signage on Route 1 South.
Better signage for businesses or directing people to places in town,
Well,
or?
especially businesses.
Yep.
It's been a constant fight down there for years. People are driving by, they don't want too big a sign. You can't do this, you can't do that. One of my neighbors, took down a signpost. When she put up the next one, they said it wasn't a replacement, it was a all-new signpost. They had to reduce the size of a sign. Became a mess, became a joke. If you're driving by 55 miles an hour, it's not, you gotta have a bigger print than you do uptown where you're walkable. So we've been restricted on signage down there for years.
Yep. All right. With that, that is pretty much it for the presentation. So Next steps, well, like we talked about, I can come back with some of the updates on some of these questions that we talked about today in October, probably. But then from there, we'd probably be looking at developing draft language to come back to the board, maybe in November, if some of this other stuff, parking moratorium, starts coming back, or design review, ordinance update, we come back with a draft. Maybe it gets pushed to December, but I'll kind of take the direction that the board's given and start working on putting an amendment together to come back later this fall. And then the last question I had on noticing, because we're not changing any map boundaries here, and we're not changing any uses, either getting rid of or allowing new uses, we wouldn't be required to notify the entire district with, mailing abutters in this for C1 and C3. But does the board want to do that as we start to develop actual language and invite those people to these meetings specifically?
I would say yes.
I
At
thi-
least at some point.
I think when you get some hard stuff to talk about, you should invite people in.
Yeah.
You're talking about a public hearing to,
Well, we'll have to have a public hearing, but
Just a workshop.
Workshop or something.
yeah,
Workshop.
even, when we come back, let's say in November, and there's a draft document of an actual track change, ordinance amendment, at that point, we'd have something substantial that, people could weigh in on, and, the board could weigh in on, but, we could actually invite C1, C3 property owners to the conversation.
Yeah,
So,
I would be
do
in
that.
favor of that. Yep.
okay. All right, that's it.
Great. I'm assuming nobody wants to address the board on non-agenda items.
Motion to adjourn.
A second?
Second. Oh.
All in favor?
All right,
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you.
What's the temperature? 62.